Okay, let's start. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Frontier Technology for Sustainable Development Opportunities and Challenges. My name is Bahman Jawadi from Western Sydney University. Let's start with acknowledgement of the country. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodian of the land on which we meet today and pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. And I especially would like to welcome all Indigenous and Torres Islanders who are in the meeting today. I would like to give you a very warm welcome on behalf of Western Sydney University, International Federation for Information Processing, and Australian Computer Society for this event. Please note that this webinar will be recorded. Please use your Q&A function for asking questions during the event. And if you have any general comment and feedback, please put it on the chat function. We are very happy and excited to host this event. We received almost 140 registration for in more than 15 countries around the world. And we are very happy to have all those students, researchers, and representatives from different countries and organizations. We have a great agenda today for the attendees. We're going to have a short introduction. After finishing that, then we're going to have the session 1, which is the Frontier Technologies for Health and Wellbeing. We have 3 presentations, each of them 20 minutes, then followed by question and answer and discussion. Then we will take a short break for 15 breaks, and then we move to the session 2, which is the Frontier Technology for Equality. And then again, we're going to have 3 presentations followed by question and answer and discussion, and then closing remarks. Hopefully we can finish it around 6:30 today. Without any further ado, let's start the opening. I would like to ask Professor Simon Simov, Dean of the School of Computer Data Mathematical Sciences, to provide his opening remark. Simon, stage is yours.
Thanks. Thanks, Bahman, and thanks everyone for attending this event. I also welcome you to this Thought Leadership Forum. I want to thank the Australian Computer Society and IFIP for this collaboration, and would like to emphasize that this is not happened just by chance. This partnership with Western Sydney University really is connected with the commitment and work that Western Sydney University does in the space of sustainable development and of sustainability. Bahman, can we have the slide, please? I'll use this slide. This is a summary, a snapshot of the Sustainable and Resilience 2030 Decadal Strategy of the university. And this event obviously is part of implementing that strategy. You can see the 9 goals and the 5P, the 5P basis on which around which the plan is done. And we obviously are looking at the aspects of technology in supporting each of these sort of goals. And please, the next slide, Bahman. And it's not a surprise that the university performs extremely well in the impact rankings related to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And it's in the top 1.5% of the world's universities, and we're talking about 1,200 universities. But the selected goals here that you see all relate to one single right, the right to health. And today's forum really is looking both sessions really are looking at the connections of technologies and the thoughts in that direction of how we can support better this right to health. So, so I think that whether that's having an access to clean water, or whether that's related to clean energy, or decreasing the toxicity of environment, this is all related to the right to health, and technology in this sense plays a key role. So on that point, I am looking forward to the next few hours for an interesting discussion and directions of where we are heading. Thank you, Barman.
Thanks, Simeon, for your introduction. And I would like to invite Anthony Wang, the president of International Federation for Information Processing, to share his thought with us. Anthony.
Thank you, Barman. I'm sharing my screen.
Yes, please.
Thanks to Western Sydney University for inviting me to speak to you today. Correction, Barman, I'm not the president yet. I will be in 2022. I'm currently the president-elect, just been elected. So thank you for the privilege and the honor of addressing to you today. So thank you for the ACS and Western Sydney for participating in the IFIP 60 series, a very exciting series of events around the world. Barman, can you see my screen? And thank you. This will be the first Australian event taking part in the IFIP 60th. As I mentioned to the IFIP General Assembly last week when I got elected the next president of IFIP, that this is a very important time in human history. Recently, the United Nations Secretary General said that the world is at a critical point where technology governance is now more urgent than ever in this ongoing pandemic. So we all at home in Sydney. I'm actually working from home in lockdown. I think this is the 14th week of lockdown. So just looking at IFIP plays a very important role in regard to where we're at with technology today. And I think ICT professionals, including our many academics around the world, have an important role to play, because technology in most areas of work, life, and play is impacting on our social constructs, workplace, and society. So over the last few months and over the next coming months to December, IFIP, working with partners and members across the world, including Western Sydney University and ACS, we're hosting more than 42 events and growing around the globe. So you can see just quickly some of the sample of the 42 events happening or has happened already around the world. So there are two types of events. We have got the special panel series, the IFIP Future Event Series. The last one just happened on Monday, and then we've got 7 more to go. So to sign up, just go onto the website. There are links to that you can sign on to. And in addition, we've got many other events from member societies around the world, from the BCS to Canada to South Africa, Korea, Brazil, and our many technical committees in IFIP. So just on this virtual series, you may have participated in the first 2 already, the Silent Revolution and the Twin Digital Cities. Those are all very topical topics that have been covered by IFIP. And just this week, we have a session on data science and coming up on the ethics and professional conduct of professional practice. So these are but some of those events. So please do look at those, because I think they will be of value to members and the public across the world. Our very last event in the series will be held in conjunction with the Internet Governance Forum in Poland on day 0. That will be happening on the 6th of December. So here you can sign up with that link on the slide. In addition, we've taken this opportunity to showcase the hundreds of volunteers who's working on the many technical committees of IFIP. So this is just a sample of some of our faces around the world, all working on the many issues and topical issues that we are confronting and deriving benefits from today in technology. So on this occasion, I'd like to congratulate Western Sydney again for hosting this event today, and hope you guys enjoy and learn much from this very important topic on sustainable goals. So thank you again. Back to you, Baman.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for sharing your thought and all those events from the IFIP. So I'll just back to my presentation again and go to the, sorry, sometime in switching between that might take a bit of time. Bear with me, I'll do the sharing again. So thanks, Simon and Anthony, for a nice opening. So at this point of time, I would like to hand over the floor to my colleague, Associate Professor Anupama Ginigi, to chair the first session, Frontier Technology for Health and Wellbeing. Anupama.
Thank you, Bahman. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this session. This is the first session that we're going to have. We're going to have two sessions, as you would have seen in the program. My name is Anupama Ginigi. I'm an associate professor in the health informatics in the School of Computer, Data and Mathematical Sciences here at Western Sydney University. And I'll be chairing this first session. A warm welcome to everybody from around the world and to our presenters who are coming here today. Before I introduce our first presenter, I'm just going to repeat what Bahman said, few things. So this session is going to be running, we're going to have 3 presenters. Each will be giving a talk around 20 minutes presentation today, and followed by that, we will have a 45 minutes Q&A session. So it's more like a panel session, if you like, and the presenters and the speakers and the panel members and their contributors will be there to answer your questions and comments. You can post your questions and comments anytime through the chat box on the Zoom session. Also, I've been informed by our facilitator, Bahman, that there is a $50 vouchers actually available for the best question or the comments that is made by the participant. But there's a small caveat though. The small caveat is it's not available for Western Sydney staff members, but it is available for anybody else who is participating today. The winners will be announced at the end of the session and end of the whole event. So pay close attention and keep those questions coming to us. So we'll be going through those questions. All right, so without wasting too much time, let's get started with our first presenters. So let me introduce our first presenter. Our first presenter today is Professor Anthony Mader, who is an emeritus professor in the College of Nursing and Health Sciences in the Flinders University. Professor Mader holds a PhD in software engineering from the Monash University, and he's been the leader in the health informatics, especially in education sector across 3 sectors in 3 states in Australia. For example, in 2004, Professor Mader was appointed as the inaugural research director of the Australian eHealth Research Centre at CSIRO. In addition to that, in Brisbane, and then in 2008, he was appointed as the Professor of Health Informatics in the Western Sydney University in New South Wales, where he went to establish research lab and courses related to this field. And then again in 2016, he was appointed as the Professor of Digital Health Systems at Flinders University, where he established the Flinders Digital Health Research Centre in South Australia. It is my great pleasure to welcome my mentor and esteemed researcher in health informatics field, Professor Anthony Mader, to give us a talk about artificial intelligence and digital health, challenges and directions. Over to you, Anthony.
Thank you, Anupama, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to share a few different perspectives on this interesting topic, but I'd like to begin by saying this is not really my area of primary specialization in digital health. However, in the last 5 years while at Flinders, I've encountered many different areas in digital health that need artificial intelligence. Some of our work, for example, in smart homes or conversational agents or risk prediction have leveraged this area. So I've become rather acquainted with some different issues in artificial intelligence, and I'm sharing them as a health informatician rather than an artificial intelligence expert. So AI 101 would have to begin with Alan Turing's observation that really, if we want to know what intelligence is, we have to reference humans. That is to say, we can't divorce intelligence from the human understanding. And so the well-known Turing test, of course, expresses that. Interestingly, Turing also pointed out that if you do strive to computational means for artificial intelligence, you can't expect perfection. Intelligence is inherently an evolutionary, changing, evolving thing. And so you can't equate artificial intelligence necessarily with infallibility, but perhaps you can be right most of the time. A good example of this human versus machine dichotomy is the question of at what stage you can outperform humans. So this is a nice example from the well-known robot soccer area of striving to build robots that can play better soccer. The question is, at what point can they outplay the human? So artificial intelligence is actually an amalgamation of a number of different algorithmic areas, from its origins in reasoning and rule-based deduction, transformed nowadays into areas like machine learning, through to areas where a lot of data needs to be processed to make decisions, for example, in natural language processing or optimization. And finally, to this area of sensory or cognitive confluence, where we might join together things like speech and vision and robotics to make action. So the idea of artificial intelligence, as many different things, is quite visible over its history, where if we look at the timeline over the last 70 years since Turing's epiphany, we see there's a number of contributions of the various types of AI that I've just articulated that come and go at different points in time. And a particularly difficult session in the middle called the AI winter, where people are really casting around for new directions in AI. And what has really turbocharged it since then has been the advent of sufficient computational power and innovations in hardware and software that transformed what people wanted to do into something that could be done with existing resources. So I think over this 70 years or so, I see there are three different phases, from those early beginnings with very simple algorithms that are based on your best guess of how you might build something to fool a human and how it might only apply in a certain range of situations. An example being ELIZA, the quite well-known mimic psychologist conversation generating program, which really doesn't last long under scrutiny, doesn't take a lot to break. Into the second phase, which I think is probably achieved mostly in the 1990s, where we have much more complex algorithms with more sophisticated behavior possible, customization, switching between different desired behaviors in the artificial intelligence environment, and being able to cover a complete scope of activities. So an example of that is the Deep Blue chess playing program that can outperform human chess players. And finally, in the last decade, I think we've seen a real pivoting to algorithms that are much more dynamic, much more self-modifying, much more changing on the fly than bedded down in a fixed format. And the same way they can adapt to different situations, different users, different storylines, different outcomes in their artificial intelligence performance. And so we can cope with a number of different scopes. And a good example would be Watson, the machine learning algorithm that IBM has embodied, which played Jeopardy so successfully. So that's where we are today. The question is, where are we going next? And a very good answer to that question is posed in an interesting document that I came across recently, produced by a group called AI 100. This is a group of experts in AI who say AI is here to stay, but it's going to take a long time for it to become intrinsically part of our society. So let's study how steps towards that are happening and make recommendations on how we can direct to accelerate those. So their agenda is, over the next 100 years, hence the name, they are going to motivate for a cyclic review of artificial intelligence. And every 5 years, a report like this will come out. And this report has been very interesting in provoking some perspectives that are maybe pretty obvious, but are really worth articulating in a public setting. The first observation they make is that although we haven't really got to artificial intelligence yet, we've got close enough. And in fact, a lot of artificial intelligence solutions are now well embedded in daily life, in society-facing implementations of computational intelligence. So we don't hesitate to use online AI, for example, to buy things. And there is therefore a degree of acceptance and trust that a human-like behavior is achievable. The flip side of that is that the risks are now much more poignant, much greater, and we should be paying attention to them. So we're at a bit of a tipping point where we should start to worry seriously about how do we control AI well enough so that the risk of harm or difficulties caused to people is minimized, and that we have some way of formalizing and controlling that appropriately. So this means, and third observation I'd pull out of this report, is that we should see AI not as an end in itself, not as a thing that IT people do to help society, but actually as a thing that society needs, and a thing that society will be strengthened by if people can be empowered by the aggregation of AI in daily life. Not taking the power away from them or devaluing what they do, but providing more powers or a different range of powers. So that's a bit challenging, particularly when we reflect that the normal applications of AI that we encounter in everyday life are just things that keep the wheels of society turning. So things like recommender systems if we're buying things online, or the many gaming environments that we encounter, or stock market and weather forecasting applications that we use frequently, or the control systems that we trust to, for example, drive our power and water or our autonomous vehicles. And even in our own environment as academics, where we encounter the automation of education, the tasks that are normally left to academics, such as assessment or delivery of material, can be increasingly automated. So that leaves us wondering, perhaps, so what about healthcare? This is truly an important societal element, but it's something which AI hasn't penetrated as far as it might. And part of the reason is health is probably not quite sure what AI can do for it. You know, the old Star Trek tricorder is an example. Would you like to have some computational device that you can point and click and get an example or a judgment rather of what the diagnosis and treatment for that person's illness should be? Well, actually, you can almost do that, because a company called Babylon has produced an online symptom analyst program, which is used in lieu of a doctor in many different settings, and indeed can outperform doctors in some settings. Well, diagnosis and treatment is not all there is in health. And if you look at what the business market predicts, these are 10 hot areas from one predictor, I should hasten to add, which target things that are actually quite hard for humans to do well. So things like robotic surgery and medical image analysis can push the envelope on what's humanly possible. But interestingly, about half of these things, the bottom half in this diagram, are things to do with the health system and not to do with clinical processes. So things like workflow design and risk prediction are intrinsically computational tasks, but they're at the moment carried out very much with human endeavor in the health sector. Well, here's another perspective on what artificial intelligence should be in healthcare. And this is the perspective that the National Institutes of Health through the National Library of Medicine take. So they define through their MESH terminology, medical subject headings, artificial intelligence is intrinsically a computational thing, and all the areas that I mentioned earlier are listed here. So if you write a paper in medicine about artificial intelligence, it's going to get classified according to this system and not according to the particular medical application of it. That means if we try and scan the literature via PubMed, we're going to find that there's an increasing, of course, reference to AI as time goes by. But interestingly, there's a knee point about 5 years ago when far more publications per year started appearing. And this perhaps signals a change away from that very conventional, algorithmic focused view to one that is perhaps more applications focused. So I took a look through these papers, and the major themes that emerge are very much themes of the time. A lot of the AI papers in medicine are dealing with big data problems. So things that need computational grunt and therefore need some decisions built into them that rely on the data analysis, things like genomic analysis or drug design. Secondly, in public health, there's a lot of effort being put into surveillance and changing health behaviors of individuals, and those things require AI to drive them. There's more and more interest in assisted care, care outside of the realms of hospitals, perhaps in your own home or perhaps online to conversational agents. And then finally, there's a lot of attention being paid to how can we improve health services, how can we reform the health system, and these so-called softer areas of impact that AI would bring. Interestingly, these things fit into the context that's been quite well recognized for digital health solutions, which is that they're all developed in a tension between different competing factors. So there's a tension between what do you want the clinical process to deliver, what is the clinical purpose, what are the clinical components to a digital solution, versus what is the technology that you need to enable that. And similarly, a tension between the health system and how it works and what it wants to achieve, and the stakeholders who are affected by the solution in the sense that their health or their delivery of health services is going to be done through that solution. So this provides a very useful context for explaining some of the developments in AI. So let's concentrate for a moment then on where AI is going in healthcare. And this other very recent document from the US National Academy of Medicine tries to provide a commentary on where they think AI should go in healthcare and what they think the blockers and enablers might be. So this perspective is a very powerful one, and one that resonates with that contextual diagram that I showed a moment ago. They say, we really should be doing AI for everybody, not just for clinical services or for administration or for the patient's benefit, but all should benefit. At the same time, we need to make sure that the systems that we use avoid harm. We need ways of detecting that. We need ways of dealing with that. We need ways of preparing the workforce to accept that. And in the same way, the health system itself needs mechanisms to cater for the sort of change, be it organizational or human, that is going to come with AI. So how do we share roles and responsibilities with a machine? How do we monitor the performance so that we know that the AI is delivering well, and so on? A very interesting diagram in this report shows that AI can be very helpful in a very elusive element in the healthcare system. So if you look at the top 4 triangles, these are the 4 areas that generally have some stake in some improvement of the health system. The administrators through improving efficiency or reducing cost, the government through the health of the population at large, the clinical sector through the way care teams can react, and the patients, the receivers of the care. But there was perhaps a missing element, and that is society's view as a whole. So the opportunities to provide better equity, better access to care, better inclusion of disadvantaged elements in society is a real breakthrough opportunity for AI, because AI can provide some of the mechanisms necessary to satisfy that urge. If you look over the field of AI as a whole, people have proposed various different frameworks as ways to construct new AI applications, or ways to ensure that the environment in which new AI applications are going to be adopted well. And they might have taken a perspective of the physical environment in which the application is going to be delivered, or the organizational environment, or the application development environment, and so on. But these different frameworks, these different environments, really do not acknowledge the underlying structure of the system in which they're going to fit. So I want to talk for the last part of this talk about how we might address that in health. A very interesting paper by Trish Greenhall and others came out recently, which suggested that if you want success in health technology implementation, you really have to treat it as a system of systems. So you have to have a purpose, a value proposition, they call it, which coalesces a health condition with the technology approach you've chosen to use, with the adoption environment in which it will take place. And then you have to overlay that with the healthcare organization's constraints, and with the wider system within which healthcare exists constraints, and with the constraint that it's going to be long lasting, so it has to be able to evolve and sustain over time. This is a much more powerful paradigm than those simplistic frameworks of the previous slide. Indeed, it gives us a segue to an alternative perspective on how we might include AI in healthcare, and that is to consider AI as part of a systematic change in healthcare. So probably the strongest proponent of this in Australia is Enrico Coira, who's published a couple of papers recently suggesting that we look on AI in healthcare as actually the construction of a massive cyber social system where we're getting inputs of an intelligent nature from a number of sources. And he's identified a number of components here which are part or characteristic of these cyber social systems. How do we pull together the thinking of humans and machines? How do we develop new models for the distributed intelligence and understanding that's going to be required from those different sources? How do we build systems that can be reconfigured, so-called turbulent systems? How do we provide the right tools for pulling together the data and decisions? And how do we build a command structure people will accept and understand that lets everybody stay connected in that system? So this is quite an exciting prospect, and Enrico has been spearheading a new group in Australia, the Australian Alliance for Artificial Intelligence in Health, which has a number of quite strong international members. And the idea is to try and use this as a test bed, or try and use this as a discussion conduit for looking at this kind of cyber social model rather than a conventional algorithmic model. So in conclusion, I have to have a deja vu moment. I've been talking about e-health for many years now, and one of my most inspirational departure points in that has been Gunther Eisenbach's comment 20 years ago that actually e-health's not about the IT, it's about the change in the way of thinking, the connectedness, the commitment, the networking. It's a state of mind. And I think we should probably view AI in healthcare in that way as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you very much for your presentation. That's very, very interesting. And we've got several questions, but we will hold off the questions for the Q&A session. Thank you. I welcome everybody actually to post your questions. We've got several questions coming in. Please keep sending your questions through the chat box, and we will definitely try and address all of those things during the Q&A session. All right. So we are almost on time, a little bit behind, but let's keep rolling. Our second presenter is Dr., or should I call double doctor, Jim Basilakis, who is a senior lecturer in health informatics in this, at Western Sydney University. Dr. Basilakis completed his medical training at UNSW, worked in the tertiary education hospital system as a medical registrar and a medical officer in emergency medicine for 15 years. Then this work got extended to primary healthcare sector in a medical director role for a telehealth company. This doubling with the technology has sparked Dr. Basilakis' interest in the computer science, leading him to completing a PhD in applied cryptography. Hence, my previous remark about the double doctor. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome my dear colleague, Dr. Basilakis, to do the next presentation on platform for sensitive data access and use in healthcare. Over to you, Jim.
Thanks, Anupama, and thank you for the opportunity to present in front of everyone. I'm just going to share my screen and bring my slides up. Can you see that? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. And excited to be able to present in such a wide audience, and thank you to the organizers as well. So I'm going to talk about just some cross concerns because we're dealing with health and also equity. I'm just going to give my perspective on data access equality and just some, since doing my PhD, which was awarded this year, and this talk was supposed to be about that, I'm just going to talk about some of the things that I've been involved with previously, subsequent to my PhD, and just talk about some of the observations I've made regarding that and relate it to my PhD later on. So just not to be too technical. So what I'm referring to is like recently there's been some large changes afoot. There's been some large IT infrastructure changes that address equitable and streamlined access to sensitive information. Now, universities for some time have been developing kind of large-scale infrastructure for platforms for research and sensitive data analysis. And there are a number of them, like SERP at Monash, Erica at UNSW that uses AWS managed services. There's RNet Sensitive Data Service that uses kind of institutional infrastructure, AIS, SD, a lot of them. And they're aiming to simplify access to data for researchers, reduce the time consuming governance approvals and administrative overheads for data supply. At the same time, also hospitals as well, they're getting more access to technology, converting their business intelligence units towards data analytical centers where they can analyze increasingly more and more information. So they're using they're bringing on technology such as data lake twins, modernizing their data workloads, increasingly using cloud-based tools and advanced analytics as well. And together with that, New South Wales eHealth is developing a statewide single digital patient record that aims to kind of democratize data access across all local health districts for easier reporting and analytics, and having a consistent view across patients, clinicians, and other stakeholders as well. And it aims to reduce the time and cost of data extracts by faster data ingestion. Typically, getting data extracted for a particular project would take, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, and a lot of consultants to actually extract the data. With this new infrastructure, and it depends on sort of AWS services, they'll be able to do it in a matter of a week or two. So, but it remains to be seen how easy this makes access to data. I mean, some of these platforms for sensitive data analysis, despite being there, still makes it's still very difficult to find who has authority for where to find the data, get permissions from data custodians, who has the authority to move over the data. There's still a lot of legwork still remains, and so just access to data is actually quite difficult. And the proof of that is that there's really decades worth of healthcare data, millions of patient encounters with only relatively or little or slowly derived clinical insights to show for it. There's just so much data, but not much, so much knowledge to unlock from it, and not much has been done so far. In fact, in terms of access to healthcare data, it's still inequitable fundamentally. There are a few, for instance, in hospitals who enjoy kind of an extraordinary access to data, particularly for complying with kind of broad financial and service quality outcome measures, such as things like the activity-based funding model. There's healthcare roundtables, and they have quite a lot of access to really finely granular data, right down to the ward and patient level, and they're exchanging this information continually as well. With rightfully so. I mean, there's little restrictions in terms of the access to it, because it's really running the business of hospitals. But on the same token, there's also health informaticians with a lot of knowledge, evidence-based data analysis, and clinical decision support expertise that are in the business of saving lives, and it should be recognised as such. And they have to go through a lot of hoops in order to get access to data. And the situation is that with these business intelligence units come clinical data analytics units, they'll be having now with increasing access to a lot of advanced cloud-based clinical and analytical tools with greater capabilities to report on sort of granular clinical associations and outcomes. And the argument will be that it's for improving their performance, improving their clinical outcomes. The argument would be there. So they may not have the same restrictions that others do, and that will further exacerbate inequities as well. So, and the systems used in, between the hospitals and, outside external sort of centers or platforms, they're typically distinct. Typically you get a batch of data and you move it over to these platforms, and there's nothing that goes back to them. They're not integrated, and therefore, business intelligence units have to kind of redesign things all over again. So there's no sort of interaction. So we really need to kind of achieve the correct balance. We need to have more agile ethics processes in line with technological advancements. Not saying that ethics is not correct, but the fact that there is so much to do and so difficult to access, they may need to look at different ways of doing things, and perhaps with these new development, these new tools, they can become in line with those. And clinical data analytics is the new business imperative. I mean, some places like the Children's Hospital in Melbourne have implemented like the Epic EMR, and they've reported on improvements in of the children mortality, and they're reporting it in terms of, we've saved a child, one less child dies within 2 to 3 weeks, so they're really reporting on actual improvements to that kind of detail, and soon with more and more analytics, we'll be able to have similar type of comparisons as well. We really need a multidisciplinary approach to analytical medical rounds with an inclusive and rotating expert mix. We need a larger case mix of experts looking at data. I was recently sort of involved with a powwow between cardiologists and Microsoft staffs and some of their engineers and AI experts, and together, starting from scratch with no data and pre-approval of ethics, we were able to get almost immediate access to the data. We were collaborated in extracting it, collaborating it in anonymizing it, and then we were able to sort of work on a problem. We had cardiologists annotating, image files, and in the end, we in about 2 weeks, we developed an AI system that was able to annotate high-resolution angiogram images, or not angiogram, OCT images. They're a specialized kind. And in order to, the end result is to provide assistance to, interventional cardiologists. And that sort of gave me a view of the future of how medicine should be practiced. We should have, a lot, what happens is with all these experts around, there's some people that goes, oh, I can help with that, or oh, I know how to do that. You get a different mix of people that can provide various expertise in reaching a problem. And we need to be that sort of agile. But we also have to realize that we're working within a regulatory environment. So quality management systems need to be in place from the start in order to take advantage of these and fast track things through regulation, rather than develop these things as an afterthought. So going back to data utility, and so back to sort of accessing individual patient data on these secure analysis platforms. They typically, to access these data and have a look at very personal sensitive information, they typically use secure virtual desktop solutions or workspaces. And some of them you need to go physically in a, apologies for the arm, physically you have to go to the institution, cut off from all internet access to access these results. Now with COVID, some of them are being offered as kind of remote solutions as well. And they deal with, the 5 safes. So things like projects, is the data appropriate? Can we prevent unauthorized access? Are the outputs prevent disclosure? And the assumptions are they're honest but sloppy. So controlling for those sort of things, the data, you can reduce the anonymization, the level of data anonymization required for the data. And you can use other safe data techniques, for instance, well, as we mentioned, anonymization, aggregation, or synthetic data techniques. But this ultimately results in a loss of useful information. So the quality of research will not be as good, or you don't develop as good as machine learning models. And the other issue is that anonymized data, with these things where, despite being honest but sloppy, but you could recognize some of the data that you're looking at, like the individuals behind some of the data. And a lot of the anonymized data potentially can be re-identifiable through longitudinal linkage. Given enough time and also other data sets, you can re-identify. And there've been a lot of high-profile cases in healthcare and in general industry where they released anonymized data but could be subsequently re-identified. Now, and so there are another set of technologies that can be, that don't have that balance of data utility and privacy trade-offs. And these are called privacy enhancing technologies. And these allow maximum value to be unlocked from data without compromising privacy or security. And there's a range of these, and all these sensitive platforms I've discussed before, none of them pretty much consider them except for the first one, which is federated analysis. And this is where you develop local training of AI or machine learning techniques, and you train and develop the models. And the models are, so the data remains locally in the institution, but the models are shared between institutions, and you develop a centralized model. And sometimes if you don't have enough data, you can still reconstitute the original identified data, but they mix well with technologies number 2, 4, and 5 to be able to give security guarantees as well. Differential privacy is another technique where you can tailor the right type of noise to a data set to anonymize it to an extent where it doesn't make you can't really identify an individual data set, and it's really based on cryptographic theory. And there's also this privacy budget where you can do a certain number of queries, but beyond which you're not allowed to because you exceed your budget. So you'll have to re-anonymize the data set. Also, there's trusted execution environments, and these are kind of processes that have a special processor set aside or where that has its own sort of operating system, which is secure, in order to execute things in a privacy preserving way. But some of these as well have been hacked into or subject to cross-site channel attacks. So, you know, they've not entirely been successful in that regard. But you know, number 4 and 5, these technologies, secure multi-party computation, homomorphic encryption, rely on performing computation and analysis on data while the data is still encrypted. And this is really the only way to achieve private computation on individual data for both operational and research purposes. Now, some people have kind of hard to get their head around that concept. How can you actually work on some data when it's encrypted? So I'm using the dreaded command line interface here in order to illustrate what I mean by that. So in this case, we have a partial homomorphic encryption scheme, which means it is able to do one operation. In this case, it can do addition, but it can't do multiple operations. So in this case, we can securely add 2 numbers. So x equals 4, y equals 10. We can encrypt x and get this long number. We can encrypt y and get another, and we encrypt it, and this is what it looks like. And then if we multiply these 2 numbers, and you can't recover these 2 numbers because they're encrypted, but when you multiply them, you get another number. And when you decrypt it, you actually end up having the addition of the 2 numbers, which is 14. And you can compare it with the plain text operation. So you can multiply these numbers despite being encrypted, and multiplying in this particular case results in the addition of these numbers. It's known as the Palea algorithm. And you can do more complex things. So in this case, you can use the same sort of scheme, encryption scheme, and you can have a list of numbers. So L1 has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. L2 has 2, 4, 9, 8, 6. And this is the encrypted list here. As you can see, there's a number of numbers in a list. And here you have the other list. And despite being encrypted, you can actually end up finding what the intersection of the 2 lists are. And in this case, it's 2 and 4. When you decrypt it, you get the result. So this concept, for instance, can be used in, you know, if you have mobile phones and you've got your contact lists and you've got 2 people with mobile phones and they're wondering who's in common from their contact list, you can run an algorithm like this and find out who you have in common without revealing the rest of your contacts. Or you can use these techniques, for instance, in anonymization of data. Instead of, you know, anonymizing the location, you can encrypt it. And then if you encrypt it, you can work with the precise location in statistics, and you can get the output without actually revealing the statistical, the identifiable information. So I've talked about secure multi-party computation and homomorphic encryption. And what's the difference? Well, secure multi-party computation uses some of these techniques, including the Palea system, and they combine them together using secure data transfer protocols in a distributed environment. And you can end up doing sort of arbitrary computations, and they involve rigorous cryptographic proofs to make sure that no information is leaked. And they use a variety of protocols as building blocks to securely create bigger and more complex systems. So they're distributed. They do rely on a lot of communication back and forth. Even, you know, you may need to do it as many times as the number of bits of information. So they're high. They consume a high level of bandwidth. But this is quite practical, and a lot of commercially, a lot of companies that provide this type of service use this type of technology. And also CSIRO as well. They've developed a lot of these building blocks as well. And have made them open source, available as open source on GitHub. Now, fully homomorphic encryption is really is a little bit different because there's a single cryptographic solution that contains the necessary secure operations for carrying out data analysis or computational tasks on a single server. Everything's contained on a single server. There's no need for distribution. And so here we have the relationship. Well, partial homomorphic can do just one operation, where somewhat homomorphic and fully homomorphic encryption can do both addition and multiplication on the same data, like encrypted data. So that means you can do a whole lot more operations like polynomials, for instance. Now they depend on noisy ciphertext, and you can when you do operations, then you increase the level of noise, and at some point the noise is so high that you can't decrypt, no longer can decrypt, and so somewhat homomorphic encryption, you just reach up to that limit, but you can actually do quite a lot even within that sort of limit. You can do things like you can even do a CNN, like an AI classification with it, for instance. But at some point that you won't be able to proceed. And this is where you go to fully homomorphic encryption, which relies on this bootstrapping recryption technique, which is unfortunately is very computationally expensive and usually takes up greater than 90% of the computational time. So it really slows things down. But for fully homomorphic encryption, you can actually develop the same equivalent secure analysis platform without the infrastructure that's required. In fact, you can deal with all the 5 safes, and in this case, you have not the honest but sloppy, but the honest but curious assumption, where the information isn't revealed at all. So you can deal with all the 5 safes, and the infrastructure. Or you just use the public cloud. You can put it on a container. You can use multi-cloud. It doesn't matter. If someone hacks into it, it's completely encrypted. So in this model, what's showing here is you have a number of people with data. They can encrypt it with their public keys, and they combine the data, which you can do a computation on it, and then you get a result. And you can only reveal the result if you have the decryption key, and only a few select people will have that, and then the outputs can be shared, and the outputs shouldn't reveal any sensitive data. So with secure multi-party and fully homomorphic encryption, so the relationship is that secure multi-party computation is low computation, high communication, always online. They're mainly sort of partial schemes, like partial homomorphic schemes, and other building blocks. Whereas in fully homomorphic encryption, you have high computation, low communication, it's offline processing, and you can only use you only need just the one fully homomorphic encryption solution. Now there are limitations with fully homomorphic encryption. I'm not going to go through all of them, but basically some of them are that it's computationally expensive, particularly if you have bootstrapping involved. And it also involves large encryption sizes. Other things also a bit more specialized. I'm not going to kind of bore you with the detail, but these schemes are improving in their sophistication to manage some of these limitations over time. They've gone through leaps and bounds over since 2009, since they were invented, incidentally by someone doing their PhD called Craig Gentry. Now, the improvements are there's faster, newer generation algorithms. They use ciphertext packing techniques to pack lots of data within a ciphertext. There's SIMD operation, which means you do multiple parallel operations. You can do several at once just to improve throughput. And you can do algorithmic tricks applied to specific application areas. And they're mainly focused on the somewhat schemes that don't require bootstrapping. And as I said, you can achieve quite a lot in there. But they're really kind of micro benchmarks. There's no sort of long-term processing. Most are characterized by sort of short type sort of trials and computations. And this leads to my PhD, which is titled Cloud-Based Homomorphic Encryption for Privacy-Preserving Machine Learning in Clinical Decision Support. My supervisors were Associate Professor Baman Javadi, Professor Simeon Simoff, and Professor Anthony Mader. And I'd like to extend my gratitude to their support and professionalism and providing such an enjoyable experience. Essentially what it does, it examines the intractable issues associated with fully homomorphic encryption schemes, which limits their practical application. It offers a solution called the homomorphic encryption bus, which consists of so you compromise, so you reach, you don't go for a server online solution, but you significantly reduce the interaction between a client and server only when required. And some of the limited interactions use complex data obfuscation techniques that exploit homomorphic encryption properties to achieve security of sometimes you're required to do a client-based encryption. And there's a slight weakening of the security guarantees in these interactions, but it doesn't affect the overall platform security. So, so really the compromise really allows a more uniform and flexible and general approach to privacy preserving system integration, which is suitable for cloud deployment. So it deals with the intractable fully homomorphic issues. There's broader homomorphic encryption processing capabilities and practical applications, a rich set of capabilities and very complex depth of homomorphic encryption operations. So suitable for long-running, privacy-preserving processing requirements of a cloud-based clinical decision support system, typically requiring complex combinatorial and numeric logic. It facilitates workflow and also machine learning capabilities, demonstrated doing sort of multiple machine learning classification types, and also neural network training, so with full back propagation. Although it's too slow to be practical, that's where you go for federated analysis, but it's nonetheless the capability is there, which would make anything else, if you can achieve that, then it's pretty trivial to do things like logic and workflow and classification. And my PhD was awarded in May 2021. This is kind of the arrangement in the cloud for sustainable homomorphic encryption computation. There's some niceties here where you can actually mix it with secure multi-party computation. You also deal with pack ciphertext all the time. You don't need to unpack. And so when you do computations, it's a bit like doing arithmetic registers. So there's efficiencies there. So thank you very much for listening. That's all I had to say, and look forward to the further talks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. Yeah, so we've got some questions coming in. Just a quick reminder for the participants, if you've got a question, please do post it to the Q&A section, and we will try and get to all of the questions in the Q&A session. We see some hands raised. I'm not sure, probably we might not be able to give you a mic given that this is a webinar. So it would be great if you can post your question on the Q&A section. Remember, we've got a $50 gift voucher for the best question or the comment that is made through there. All right, so we're going to our final presentation in this first session. Our next presenter is Dr. Marlene Warnfield. She's a widely published multi-award winning researcher from CSIRO, where she is a senior research scientist and a team leader. Dr. Warnfield has done her MSc in Faculty of Dentistry in the University of Pretoria in South Africa. She completed her PhD in epidemiology and preventative medicine in Monash University. Currently, she leads the mobile health systems team at the Australian eHealth Research Centre and Health and Biosecurity area at CSIRO. Her research focuses on development and implementation of tele and mHealth services for supporting management of people living with chronic conditions such as cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, and kidney diseases. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Warnfield, who will be joining all the way from Brisbane to tell us a few about the future of health is in your pocket. Over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. It is my pleasure and privilege to be talking to you this afternoon on technologies for health and well-being, and especially on how we can share the data between patients and their health services, and then also to make use of the data to make appropriate decisions for clinicians. I will also be talking on behalf of two of my colleagues that will be part of the panel in a bit later in the session. And that is Sankrop Khanna and Christian Red. This is just to tell you a bit more on where we fit within CSIRO. So within CSIRO, there are a number of business units in focus areas. And we fall within the health and biosecurity. So there are about 600 people within this business unit in AEHRC. So we work for the Australian eHealth Research Centre. The AEHRC is a joint venture between Queensland Government and then also CSIRO's National Digital Health Program. We have over 100 scientists and engineers, and then also further 30 or so students across Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra. And it is the largest digital research program in Australia. We have research programs in 3 healthcare areas, and that is health informatics for improving health systems performance. We've got health services, improving access to services through using telecare, mobile and remote monitoring. And then we have biomedical informatics. Can I move that? Biomedical informatics, leveraging operational and clinical data. So just to give you a bit of background and to introduce some of the motivation for what we do, let's look at the Australian health system. On the left is a look at the range of different health measures and how Australia compares against other OECD countries. In January, we do quite well, but as you can see, we do eat too much and we drink too much and we are quite big and obese. The challenge is that over the past decade, our population has grown by 17%, while our health spending has grown to be 71% in the same period. So this growth is unsustainable, and we need to find new and more efficient ways of delivering healthcare. In the face of this challenge, CSIRO and the Australian eHealth Research Centre released the Future of Health report, outlining 5 themes designed to assist in the shift of Australia's health system. From a reactive and resource-intensive paradigm to a proactive and holistic predictive approach. These themes are meant to be incorporated in all aspects of the health system, with an emphasis on digital transformation to overcome the rising costs and challenges of the health system today. At AEHRC, our health system analytics team, led by Suncorp, is helping to contribute to that digital transformation in 3 areas. First, we have initiatives to improve health system productivity and efficiency. This is achieved through the development and implementation of health system simulations to identify bottlenecks and predict demand, to better direct resources and plan for the future. Second, we have developed clinical decision support models to better predict patients at risk of deterioration, to reduce preventable hospitalizations, and to reduce the instance of readmissions. And third, we are providing evidence-based evaluation of existing and emerging care models to measure impact and boost translation of evidence into practice. As mentioned previously in the Future of Health report, to achieve real impact, we must work to translate research into practice. Starting in 2017, the Healthcare Homes Risk Stratification tool was developed, validated, and rolled out to 200 GP practices to determine the probability of a patient having an unplanned hospitalization over 1 year. This predictive algorithm is publicly available through the Department of Health and is an important decision-making support tool for GPs for proactive and holistic management of at-risk patients. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Australian eHealth Research Centre worked to rapidly develop COVID-19 datasets and dashboards to help understand the pandemic progression in Queensland and around the world, and to inform decision-making on health policies and responses. To facilitate this decision-making, we incorporate real-time data from a variety of sources to measure and forecast current and future trends. This expands beyond just health data to incorporate social media trends, economic activity, and other sources for insights into trends that may not be available through pathology and health services data alone. For instance, looking at economic data, we have found that as a country, we have stopped caring about what they look like. We spend less on hairdressers and clothing, but we are spending rather a lot of money on alcohol. I'll now go over to mobile health systems, as this is an area where I am more familiar in, and that is also the team that I lead. Mobile health systems is an exciting space driven by rapid development of new technologies for measuring and delivering health data. The challenge is in the speed at which new technologies come on the market, and this far outpaces the associated research and evidence-based practices for use in health and well-being. With these technologies, there exists a wealth of health information sitting in everybody's pocket, and that is your smartphone. We have developed a platform that takes advantage of these technologies. For example, we use smartphones to collect data from patients. It could be through manual entry or through Bluetooth connection, and it could even be a short survey that patients complete. That then uploads to a centralized database, and from there, the healthcare team can monitor and follow up according to appropriate protocols. We also use the smartphone to deliver text messages or educational material. We actually tried this quite a long time ago. In 2009, we started a project on cardiac rehabilitation. And that was a project that we ran to show that cardiac rehab can be delivered at home as well as it can be delivered through at a center. And we used a smartphone model for remote monitoring. In those days, it was a very old Nokia phone. We indeed showed better uptake and adherence to the program with similar clinical outcomes. And this was recognized by Nature Reviews as a first of its kind in the world, using a smart-based model for some care, in this case, cardiac rehabilitation. Very recently, in 2021, this paper was ranked in the top 10, or sorry, top 15 for publications in cardiac rehabilitation, and it was ranked within the top 100 for mobile health publications, and there are a lot of them out there. And I think that just proves that we really are looking for the evidence. There are many, many solutions and digital platforms out there, but there's a need, and that's my job, and that's what I do with my colleagues, and that is to provide the evidence for these solutions. But apart from getting publications out of it, we also want to translate our solutions into practice. And as you can see, one of our solutions spun out as the company CardiHab. I'll just briefly mention some of the trials that we're running at the moment. Our biggest mobile health project is Mother. It's a solution that we developed for mothers with diabetes during pregnancy. And the aim is to replace manual record keeping with an online platform and to provide better monitoring and support for ladies and with their clinical team. Our feasibility study at Wetland Hospital here in Brisbane was really successful, and we fast-tracked the full implementation study last year to minimize the need for women to come into the hospital throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, but to still receive support tailored to their individual needs. To date, more than 2,000 women have benefited from the solution, and as well as the Brisbane hospitals, we are also now looking at using the Mother in regional and rural communities. And we recently recruited 30 women from the Mount Isa Base Hospital to study and provide more insight into the appropriateness of the solutions such as Mother in these communities. Mother has also been deemed appropriate for women with hypertension during pregnancy, and a randomized trial is to commence very shortly at 3 of the major hospitals in New South Wales. Now, staying with diabetic conditions, we also did a project with Queensland eHealth, and this is more about hardware combined with the software. We designed, fabricated, and tested a platform that can be integrated into software, existing footwear, such as socks or thongs or even boots. And this is to detect the temperature differential between the 2 feet that can be an indication of complications related to diabetic foot. We are also, in addition to working with chronic conditions, we are working with the Jameson Trauma Institute here at Metro North, and that is to investigate intelligent connected medical devices with our solutions. 2 projects that we're working on with them is a smart ankle, and this is where we're bringing in more sensors. For example, putting a sensor into a normal boot, moon boot after ankle fracture, and we're also going to look at some sleep studies and sensors on how we can detect, for example, sleep apnea in patients within ICU. When we started originally with the mobile technologies, we all the entries were basically self-report and manual entry. We've then, with Bluetooth connection, blood pressure monitors, glucometers, and weight scales, we could incorporate that into our solution and put less activity for the patients to actually enter the data. We're now going further and we're looking at devices, for example, sleep tracking devices, which we've done a little trial on a while ago, but we would extend that further because it's really hard to know what the real ground truth is. And we just want to be able to have patients enter their data without having, or not manually entering their data, but through connection to a device to make it easier for them to use. We're also looking, and that is something that I would really like to talk to the engineers about, how we can, from devices, get a stress reading so that we can perhaps look at anxiety, stress, and depression. This is an example of an app that we co-developed with clinicians and with parents and their kids for concussion. This is an example where we're not using hardware to enter the data, but there are so many apps out there, and I think this is just another study where we can provide evidence on apps that are effective or not. So I've been working in this space for quite a long time, and on the way, apart from the opportunities, ran into the implementation challenges. For example, you plan a trial, you start the trial, and by the time you publish the results, the technology's changed altogether. And as the previous speaker mentioned, there's security measures, patients' privacy. We even have a privacy office within CSIRO now. There's downtime, breaches, integration into clinical systems. Many of the systems don't talk to each other. There's a lack of standardized terminology. Not everybody owns a smartphone. Not everybody owns a Bluetooth device or any of our fancy devices that we are looking at integrating into the platforms. There's also problems within the services. Often clinicians are told, oh, this is a new device or a new platform that we're going to test. So it's very important to develop and design these solutions with the clinicians and patients as well. Often the infrastructure is not designed for these new care models. For example, when we did the cardiac rehab program, we asked the clinicians to enter data into a computer in the gym where the patients were doing their rehab, but there was no computer. So where do you add the data if there's not a computer? And that's a simple example, but it was a barrier to the adoption of the platform. And then also change management. It is, we always work with a champion, but you have to have the whole staff behind you, because if your champion is not there, your solution will die. So even though we have evaluated many different technologies for using diagnosis and management of different conditions, The speed at which these new devices are introduced far outpaces our research. One of the biggest barriers to technology adoption is interoperability, as I mentioned in the implementation barriers. Data is siloed in different ecosystems that do not talk to each other. We have overcome some of these data challenges through our mHealth platforms, specifically facilitating the transfer of data from a device to a smartphone and then to the clinical care team. However, there is still a missing link, and that is getting that health data into the electronic health record. So in order to get health data out of our pockets from our smartphone and into the hands of clinicians and health services, we all need to follow a cohesive plan. This plan is outlined in the National Digital Health Strategy, co-designed with all states and territories. Individual organizations, including peak health organizations, researchers, healthcare providers, the industry and technology sector, and government are already working, some of them separately and some collaboratively, on delivering the benefits of digital-enabled healthcare. At present, these stakeholders are positioned at different stages along this roadmap, and increased collaboration and communication is needed to better align these diverse contributors. This is why meetings such as the one that we are having today are so valuable. We at the AEHRC are eager to collaborate to further develop frontier technologies for health and for well-being. This is demonstrated by past translation of research into practice, including, for example, our clinical terminology services, mobile apps for chronic disease management, and also smarter, safer home platforms that we've developed. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. That's a wonderful presentation, and it's so interesting to see, you know, some of the things that we have had, even in the questions that are coming through, is you address them. So just before we go into the Q&A session, I just would like to, I think Bahman has a little survey for us to provide for you to, Bahman, you want to share these details, or do you want to tell how it is being done, or do you want me to explain?
Well, yeah, so thanks all the presenter for sharing their thoughts. So it's a very simple survey. It's about, we'll be asking about the opportunities in health and well-being. So there is a list of the technology that many of our experts share with you. So you just simply go to the menti.com website and use the code on the screen that you can see. And I think the team will also share it on the chat, so you can use that. So menti.com, and then the code. So yeah, so the code is there. And then there is a ranking of different technologies. So please rank them based on what you think would be the opportunities in health and well-being. And then I'll share the result in the closing. Thank you.
Thank you, Bahman. Thank you very much. Oh, we've got wonderful 3 presentations that we finished now. We've got a number of questions, actually. Hopefully we can keep them on time. Let me start off first with our very first question to, I think it is towards you, Andrew. Given the potential speed of development, sorry, Anthony, for you, from Andrew Ford, given the potential speed of development, are accepted protocols and limitations being developed to ensure that AI serves humans and not the other way around?
There's certainly a lot of discussion of this issue. The difficulty, of course, is who owns the farm. A lot of attention is being paid by governments, and I noticed there was another question on whether there's an Australian national plan for AI and healthcare. In some countries, there have been such plans developed, and the governments in those countries are clearly seeking to take some control over how AI will be deployed more broadly. But as we know from past experience, the first mover has an advantage. The people who shout loudest have an advantage. The people who implement first, the people who implement well, probably will call the shots. So we can expect, I think, more Amazons, for example, in the area of healthcare emerging as people, take the high ground first.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Anthony. Another question, one major concern that we have in the annotation and biocuration community is that the work is not considered to be of equal value. There is a lot of effort taken in annotation some of the data. So there is very little funding. Have you found this to be an issue in Australia? I think the question is towards you. You mentioned about annotation that some clinicians did with a project example that you were working on. So
yeah,
such annotation work is not really considered to be research work, but that's really time consuming.
Yeah, I haven't been particularly involved in sort of biocuration, which kind of I understand is really trying to extract sort of knowledge from unstructured text and published data and so forth. I guess the thing is there's a lot of application areas in AI in this area, and it's really we have this grant system in place where if you have a good idea and it's measured against other ideas as well, and for and it's judged according to whether it's well thought through, it's a high priority area, and so forth. So I think making a case to a final application area, and I think AI is a direct application area in here, and talking about expertise in hospitals as well, it would make a very valuable. I mean, I'm sure you're well versed in terms of natural language processing techniques. So a lot of these things would be very relevant in the hospital areas. But so yeah, I think your skills would be very desired in terms of getting funding. I think it's together with other areas, but making a case for what's the direct application in the end. I think that's kind of the considerations as far as I'm aware.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jim. Marlene, I think this question is maybe you can tell us a little bit about what is the state of using blockchain technology in a healthcare sector in Australia. Has CSIRO has got any research work happening in that area?
Not in my field. I don't know, Sankalp, if you have any input on that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, there's definitely sort of underlying work in the space of applying blockchain technology to healthcare in Australia. There's a couple of startups in the space also that are very interesting. Within our research program, there's not direct work in this space, so definitely not the expertise to comment on that. But yes, there's a fair amount of sort of interest and rapidly growing interest in that space.
Yeah, thank you very much. Anthony, next question is, I think, for you. Who has the power over application of AI? How can it ensure that the application of AI would contribute to diversity and equality in digital healthcare? In particular, how the design and policy would address the disadvantages of the marginalized groups and communities. So it's more around. I think you mentioned this as one of the issues in your presentation.
Sure, and that's quite a difficult one because, of course, there's a small sector that is disadvantaged quite significantly, and then there are increasingly larger sectors that are disadvantaged to a lesser extent. So there's a whole spectrum of problem space. I think the two biggest impacts will be achieved if the system can pivot to adopting AI and other computational tools, nothing peculiar to AI, but if we can adopt more automation across the whole spectrum of the health system. At the moment, we have a very piecemeal approach. So somebody comes up with a good idea for, how to deal with this kind of data security problem, or how to deal with some kind of obscure diagnosis problem. and they tend to create piecemeal solutions for those. If we can bring those things together and have more of an interworking between the automation components, I think it will just automatically raise the level of better access and better service to areas that are underserved. An example from Western Sydney is actually the problem of rare diseases. So there are some diseases where there's probably only a few dozen sufferers in Australia, only a few hundred worldwide maybe. And so very little effort gets put into pooling that data. Well, you could use the same data tools as you use for the common cold in those situations if they're built to be interactive.
Mm-hmm. I think there is a follow-up question, I think, from me actually. In the fields like legal environment and as security, national security, there has been some reports around the biasness towards certain groups because of the algorithms are trained using the past data, and the past data actually has inbuilt bias in them. So do you see that such a problem, obviously, because it's a judgmental decision that is made by a human that is in that data that kind of gets fed into the algorithms? And we've seen some media reports, facial recognition initially didn't work didn't work with the people with darker skin colors, or they identified people with darker skin colors to be, to be a suspect as opposed to a person with fairer skin colors. So do you think such biasness is applicable in health because of the nature it's different? It's a very objective decision that is made by a clinician.
Well, one hopes if one's using evidence-based medicine that there is at least a large enough body of evidence that people are reasonably secure about it. Of course, it can always be improved, and we've even seen that with, COVID vaccination disputes and so on. If you have more data, you can do a better job. So part of the solution has to be not just a single shot, I've got the best app for your needs kind of solution, but one that adapts, one that improves over time, and a culture of continuous improvement and a learning health system, as it's often called. I go back to the point I made right at the start of my talk. You can't have perfection. And indeed, in everyday life, we accept that. So if we can't have perfection, we should at least have improvement.
Yep. Thank you very much. Sankalp, you have something to add to that conversation?
Yes. I think your question was around does this issue of bias exist in healthcare? And like Anthony said, yes, but I'd say that it adds an extra layer of complexity when you look at this in healthcare, because along with the normal issues around bias of building data on a sample, which may not be most representative of your overall population that you're trying to use it on, and the example you gave around that facial recognition thing, there's also other complexities that come into the picture. For example, you're building data on, and there's a couple of these open repositories that date back a few years, or use different clinical practice. There's examples out there around the fact where models trained on data from a time when AIDS was a disease that killed many people being applied to now when there's now good treatments for AIDS where people don't generally now die from that disease. And as medicine evolves, and clinical practice changes, and there's a lot of differences in clinical practices across sort of various jurisdictions and things like that. There's that added layer of complexity in applying some of these models in jurisdictions where you've not built them or not accounted for that bias properly, even in jurisdictions where you are going to use it and the data is from that same jurisdiction where you built it. Not understanding what those potential biases could be can add much more complexity to or mistakes to when you try to apply your models.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that insights. I think next question is for the CSIR team, actually, from me. Marlene mentioned quite a few of the challenges. This is actually one of the practical problems that I faced when I was as a technologist, when I tried to introduce. I was given a problem to work in Malawi, and then the issue was communicating between community clinics, which is basically a hut, and over to the district hospitals. And I mean, we go with these fancy ideas to countries like that, you know, thinking we can implement these mobile technologies with smartphones and whatnot. But then when you go there, the situation is so different to what we understand here. So and with, you know, we think about IoT devices and things like that. So what are your experiences around, or what is your thinking around, you know, applying such technology for more disadvantaged people, actually, if we are looking at, you know, equity in healthcare globally?
Just as a matter of interest, we went through Zimbabwe, Botswana, I'm South African, and a few years ago we traveled in Southern Africa, and I was amazed to see that every small little town in Zimbabwe, in Botswana, in Zambia, they have mobile towers, and we got lost, and that's how we found our way, because we just followed the mobile. So I think most people nowadays own a phone.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be a Bluetooth connected, because they can do manual entries. I think we should maybe focus on education to the clinicians and the staff on how to monitor, measure what we take for granted here. So it could be that we find people on the ground, for example, in Zimbabwe or Botswana, to find ways where they can make, instead of using a fancy ring that will collect the sleep. So if they can find a way that they can still monitor some of these measures, that we can still provide, and it doesn't have to be, it could be that they not necessarily have to go through a smartphone. It could be that the data can go straight from, I know of a company in Switzerland where it can go through a device straight to the cloud, and then clinicians can view the data. So to take it, I can say from experience that many people actually nowadays own smartphones. It's just making use of what is available in the country or for that health service on how they get their data into a ways that it can be communicated to a service.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And Christian, I would like to ask about the sensor technology. I mean, a lot of the research that we see is quite relevant to what Anthony mentioned about, they find a specific problem and they try to solve that specific problem. And then they may go and develop a very fancy sensor technology. And then when you think of the mass rollout, it's not practical to do it because it's not cost effective, or it's too costly. So what is the state of using, off the shelf sensor technology in the healthcare? Can we use all of these, the wristwatches, the Fitbits, and are they valid devices to be used in healthcare as for health purposes?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for that. I think really going back to and following up on what Marlene said, oftentimes my background is as an engineer, and you have engineers will invent a device and then go search out some sort of a problem that their device already solves. And it's a backwards way of thinking, but it's frequently the way that it happens. And it happens extensively in health, frequently just because there aren't those channels of communication between the clinicians who are on the ground, who are, have that domain knowledge about the real true problems, and then, the engineers and everyone else on that other side. And so I think, from the perspective, whether custom design devices or off-the-shelf technologies, commercial technologies, really it's important to start any sort of a research program or initiative or project engaging with those stakeholders, whether that's, you know, community clinics in, you know, here in Brisbane or, you know, in Africa or elsewhere, to really understand that problem, understand the barriers to adoption of a technology, as well as the facilitators of where that would work. And then from there, explore what is out there, because as Marlene said in her presentation, there are many different technologies available, and they evolve at a faster rate than we can really look at them and involve them. And so looking at it more from, you know, what are the best practices and principles for how those might be implemented to be able to increase and improve health management, then it becomes a little bit more of a technology agnostic solution, where you're actually looking at longer term vision as opposed to short term, does this device fit here for this, you know, just moment in time.
Yep, thank you very much. I think we have another question. I think, Anthony, you touched upon this one earlier about the road mapping, AI road mapping in Australian healthcare. And particularly this question is asking about plans regarding the technical, legal, and economical aspects of automated extraction of patient information from electronic health records. As one of the pioneers working with the electronic health records area, Anthony, do you have anything around this to be added more to this previous answer you had? The question is from Iran.
So I think the roadmap question will emerge, particularly as this AAIH group that I mentioned in my second to last slide is very active. It contains a lot of the opinion formers in Australia as part of that group. So I'm very hopeful there will be a national AI in healthcare plan at some point. I've got to say that we don't have a good record with national plans. We've had goodness knows how many telehealth plans and several national digital health plans. But at least we try to get consensus and we try to set a direction, and I'm sure that will happen in this case. I think Britain has just brought out a national AI agenda, which includes healthcare, and I think that they have been addressing some of these issues of legal and economic aspects through that. The difficulty with the electronic health record sharing and aggregation is that there isn't yet one true comprehensive electronic health record. My health record is the tip of the iceberg. It only has very uninteresting information in it, in fact. What we really need to do is harvest from all the other locations where data on a particular patient is stored and bring them together. And that's a really hard problem.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. I think there is a very interesting question for you, Jim. This question is from Yinchua Hu. The question is around, I wonder how social factors, for example, gender, race, ethnicity, and language could be incorporated into homomorphic encryption, and how information can be saved selectively without any prejudice.
I'm not sure I understand particularly the question, but I'll try and answer around some of the issues. So in terms of the data that can be saved, there are several ways to encode information in homomorphic encryption, other encryption technologies. So in the homomorphic encryption technologies I dealt with, you can store, you can deal with integers, real numbers, approximate numbers, and you can also encode things like text. So pretty much you would be able to do things like save text and search for text and so forth, and make it available and private, which is the other issue. There are several different ways that you can, use cases that you can use. One sort of way that you could use it is that if, say, for instance, someone had an issue like, I want to see, well, what specialist would be most appropriate for me based on my health record. And then you can encrypt your health record, submit it, and you can get an outcome and says, well, based on your condition, you have this or that sort of factor. I mean, it could take into account things like gender, ethnicity, and all sorts of things. And you'll get an output, and no one would have seen your record, and no one would have known any better. You're the only one who would have got the outcome, but yet you would have been able to compare with a hospital-based database, for instance. So you can do things that way, and you know, if there's some prejudice or something like that mixed in with that, then it would take it into account because it's private. Yeah, I guess I'm not sure if I've kind of answered fully what you wanted, but it's technically possible, and it could be, you know, because it's private, it may deal with some of those issues regarding prejudice. But yeah, you can apply the technology. You can do it even, you know, other kind of workflows or decision support and things like that. It very relatively simply and quickly using the type of technology that takes into account those factors as well.
Thank you, Jim. CSIRO team, probably I will forward this question to Marlene. Just question around, you know, when you talk about mobile health applications, mobile devices, and some of these health applications actually diagnose people, and then through various AI-based technologies or other intelligence mechanisms. So how do you see this from a regulatory perspective? You know, are they clinicians? Are they, how do you, sort of, can we use them? You know, we are not allowed to use a pill which is not approved by TGA, or a vaccine which is not approved by TGA, but can we use these mobile apps that are possibly not approved by TGA?
That's an excellent question. And this is, I'm actually working with a consultant who's working with a digital health agency on how do we actually, we don't have a framework yet on how we assess apps to say, is this a medical device? If you're going to make clinical decisions based on readings that you get from a patient, and the app tells, yeah, I think you should increase the insulin by 5 doses, then that becomes a medical device. So there's some of the devices are just automatically, it's a medical device because it makes decisions based on AI or machine learning. And then that would be in a category in the TGA that you have to get approval for. We have some applications that, for example, the mother application that I was talking about, the clinicians will not make a decision on changing medication without having a consultation with the patient first. So that will be a well-being app, but there's a gray area where some of them, it could be that it is a medical device, but it's not, because it's just measuring your blood pressure or your glucose. And the TGA is working, or the TGA with the digital health agency is working on how do you assess and where do you categorize the apps, like the NHS, where they have a certain registry where doctors can decide if they're going to prescribe an app as they do with medications. I think the problem there is how do you rate or assess those apps? Because it would be about safety, privacy. It would be about, is it easy to use? Can the patients use it? Can people use it? But it's also, is it effective, and how do you measure that effectiveness? Is it through clinical trials? Do you have to do 620 randomized controlled trials for 60,000 people before you have the evidence? And that is where with drugs, it's easier because you can have a clinical trial. It's harder with apps to decide, is this now effective? Where do you draw that line and say, yeah, this is effective or not? And what is effectiveness? If it doesn't do harm, is it then effective? Or, so it's a very good question that I don't have the answer for, and I don't think anybody really has the answer yet.
That's absolutely, it's something that we always think about. And just a quick follow-up, if there is let's say, such a framework for us to evaluate the apps, if, FDA, TGA approves. And I think FDA has got a high level framework that they do use. But I was just wondering also who would be the the participants in such a evaluation process, because I see in a mobile application, people who are working, the engineers, for example, who develop the app, and because they know the encryption mechanisms, or what is under the hood, not just the effectiveness of clinical perspective, but then how does the data get shared, and who has access to it, what is it, how is it stored, and all that complex information. So any other input from Christian or Sankalp around, do you have any idea around, like, should we as engineers be part of this process of evaluation of mobile apps?
Yeah, I'm happy to comment a little bit on that. I think that this is where, alongside the regulatory pathway, you have to look at the access. So if the TGA approves a drug, it's prescribed by your doctor, but then you may go to the chemist to actually go have that prescription filled. And at the moment, if you're looking at a mobile health app, you download it from a walled ecosystem controlled, depending on the flavor, by from the Google Play Store or from the iOS store. And we're starting to see more increased regulatory activity from that private sector, from Apple, for instance. All of the apps that we are, developing and using, that we submit for approvals to the App Store, we now have to submit our ethics approvals and our study protocols, and those are evaluated by Apple before they will grant access through that App Store. So they're starting to recognize that even if it's not here yet, there's only high-level frameworks, that the regulatory pathway that is coming down the pipeline, and that may just be that they're trying to position themselves to be that health app store. But in all cases, since mobile devices are purchased at retail, and the apps on them are downloaded from these different ecosystems, that has to be incorporated into any future actual regulatory framework, whether that's a separate app store, as is the case in the UK with kind of the NHS, or if that's just a stamp of approval, or if it's that the app is not accessible without some sort of an actual prescription from the GP or from another health professional.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting, very interesting.
And look, taking that a little bit more broadly to really covering any kind of software or algorithms, there's not only is the TGA regulation that Marlene was talking about around that regulation of software-based medical devices, which really covers anything that either informs, drives, replaces clinical decision-making, or provides some kind of therapeutic advice to users. That sort of broader definition. Not only is that increasingly becoming something, so I think this year was when that any transitionary arrangements also ended, and there is now a regulation in place. But there's some very interesting sort of stuff more recently, I think last year, in a Dutch court and in an Italian court, around rulings against algorithms. And the context of that, then bringing in the developers of the algorithms or the software engineers that have programmed something like this, making them sort of liable. My work is in the area of clinical decision support, and if we're predicting or identifying a patient at risk of deterioration, and for a clinician to act, if we miss a patient and that patient dies, who's responsible? Is it the clinician we're advising, or is it the algorithm? There's some really interesting conversations starting to take effect as we are now increasingly putting these things into trials and clinical use, or informing decision making at an administrative or clinical level within hospitals. So it's all very relevant.
Yeah, and there is a follow-up question actually on the chat saying, how do we define harm? Is it a subjective or objective factor?
Not my area of expertise, more a legal sort of question, but if I'm guessing a lawyer would say in any which way you can sell it to me and I can use it to frame a case. Now, like I said, in the kind of applications we look at, our decision support might go anywhere from recommending a patient for an intervention or trial to predicting that in the next 2 hours they're going to die when they're in hospital and connected to devices. So that definition can be quite broad. The Dutch case I was referring to from memory was around saying it was a violation of human rights because that was trying to detect fraud. The Italian case, and that was considered harm. The Italian case was around a Deliveroo app, and so I'm more sort of on that health applications, but I'm sure how Marlene would define harm when she's building a mobile app would be very different to how I would consider the implications of potential harm when I'm building a clinical decision support tool.
Marlene, anything to add?
I would say that, so it depends on how you intend the mobile app to be used. So if you don't intend harm, and this, I'm just repeating what I heard at one of the meetings that I was at, if you have and this is now talking as a lawyer, if there was no intended harm, and it depends on how you describe the app that it can be used for. If a person uses your app in a way that you didn't intend them to use it, like drugs, then it was not the intent to harm, but there was harm.
Yep, yes. Yeah, thank you. Anthony, anything to add? You've been dabbling in this area for a while, I believe, in your other research areas.
The difficulty with harm is that in healthcare, we're all going to die. And so eventually, there's going to be some harm in some level of interpretation. I think what one has to question rather more vigorously is where is the greater harm? So would you expect a person to live longer if they used your app properly? But unfortunately, some people don't use it properly and they suffer the consequences. Or would you just let them, let life take its natural course and let them die young and not give the app out because you can't ensure that people will never use it wrongly?
Yeah. Anthony, while I have you there is a follow-up question to something that you mentioned earlier. Do we need less biased organizations to impose standards, protocols, and platforms other than Azure and AWS? For me, that's the person asking, the monopolies may play a major importance and concern in the health space.
I feel this is a bit of a revisit of what I said earlier about the strongest will prevail. Because if you do want to regulate so that things have to be done by consensus or by regulation, you're going to wait forever. I think you have to take your chances with the first cut of things that arrive through often normal commercial channels, or at least through mass social channels, and then try and grab hold of them and improve them and control them as you need to. I mean, a good example in the cybersocial space is how social networks online have started to form, biases in political thinking and in social acceptance. And there is much more of an opportunity for one to be heard in society now, even if it's not for good. So how do we deal with that? Well, one way of dealing with it is the regulatory way. That seems to have failed in most countries, apart from a few absolutist regimes. So the better way is to step in with an improved or better solution as soon as you see the way to do that.
Thank you, Anthony. Jim.
Sorry, actually, I wanted to deal with the previous question, and also I can deal with this one, but the one in terms of harm. One thing that also, and I've been in the device area for about 10 years or so, when when we delivered sort of home telehealth solutions, and one thing that is regulation is very good. I think it's important, but it also is quite a burden, and it's quite it takes quite a long time to actually deliver some kind of device. And one should also realize there is harm from not doing something. And the thing is that in, say, for instance, in hospitals, you know, they might have the ability to, like, for instance, identify drug interactions, for instance, as a matter of routine. But I know in the past, there's been, you know, medical information officers that are reluctant to put those on because, you know, to turn those on because, you know, they're worried about the 1 in 10,000 risk of, you know, causing some sort of harm or not getting the right advice from that, as opposed to the several hundreds of people who would not benefit from some of this. So you've got to kind of realize that there is a risk with this slow innovation. There's so much low-hanging fruit that can be done in terms of decision support in you know, telehealth and in hospitals as well. We are risking a lot of harm by not actually delivering these things, you know, in a rapid way, in a, you know, but obviously not too rapidly. So there has to be some balance. It comes back to equity. Also, just sorry to address sort of Alana's question about organizations imposing standards. Like I found that, you know, like AWS and Azure, they tend to be agnostic, and we, like, there are standards, for instance, in these kind of sensitive platforms. They try to get accredited by, there's various accreditation standards in terms of security, government regulation and things. And they have the tools to be able to enable those and they can, and to actually get really good granular control in terms of security. So they do have the tools to do that, as opposed to, so people are quite afraid to use these. But they're actually much more secure than, for instance, in a hospital environment where, you know, you have all these disparate systems. They're literally a disaster waiting to happen sometimes. And, you know, all it takes is just one phishing attack. Someone just clicks on a link in a hospital network, and lo and behold, you'll see how sensitive and delicate these systems are. So, so they, you know, they do allow you to be able to broaden out what you can do and would be more collaborative in terms of the data. So those are some of the things.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for all the presenters and the questions from the audience and to the contributors that who helped to answer all those questions. And I think this session finished right now. So we will be over to you, Bahaman, to tell how long the break time is going to be and when we will be back again for the next session.
Thanks, Anupama, and thanks all the presenter and contributor to it. I really enjoyed that. It was great. So let's have a short 15 minutes break for a stretch and a drink. And still the survey is open. So if you want to still put your comments, so please go to the menti.com and use the code on the chat. So please don't leave the Zoom, just leave it open and then come back after 15 minutes. So now it's in Australian time is 4:02. So let's back in 4:15, 30 minutes. Make it easy for you. Thank you very much. See you soon. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for staying with us. So I think it was great, the session 1. Now we move to the session 2, Frontier Technology for Equality. And at this point of time, I would like to ask my colleague, Professor Alana Morushat, to chair the session 2. Alana?
Thank you, Bahman. So great first session. One of the things that kind of struck with me as we left that session was Jim was saying there was a project they worked on where they got a bunch of people together for 2 weeks and they were able to come up with a solution and have a really meaningful impact. And I often think if we were to get the panelists here together, even with the attendees, and we were all to be together within 2 weeks, I wonder how many problems we could solve over 2 weeks if we were to do the same thing. So the next panel is something that's very dear to me. It's actually the reason why I moved to Western Sydney University. Technologies for equality and people for equality, processes for equality are something dear to my heart. And I'm very excited to announce the panel today. The wealth of experience here alone is often not gathered in one spot. So we're going to have 3 presenters here today, all discussing different aspects of equality. And so equality, not only in terms of gender and race, but also socioeconomic status, languages, and of course, essential services. And so we'll have three presenters today, followed by another participant afterwards to answer questions. So without further ado, I will introduce the first presenter. So Professor Atula Ganinji is the Professor of Information Technology and a pioneer truly in the field known as social computing. I've worked with Atula now for 3 years, and I'm constantly impressed with his knowledge and his drive and passion to help humans everywhere on the planet. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Atula.
Thank you, Alana. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
And greetings. I'm not very sure whether to say good morning, afternoon or evening, because we have an international audience. So I will say greetings, and it's great to share some of my thoughts with you. And as Alana mentioned, to me, yes, health is very important, but an important pillar in that health aspect is the food. It's the malnutrition or the hidden hunger, all these affects the health. So I have been working in the food domain, and did you know 400 million smallholder farmers live below poverty line? And most of my work is in the context of Sri Lanka and India. About 42,000 Indian farmers and daily wage earners in that communities commit suicide, again resulting from poverty. And the low prices and oversupply often force these farmers to dump their harvest. And while it's happening, about 1.3 billion tons of food produced yearly is going wasted. And in 2019, based on FAO data, 2 billion people suffered some degree of food insecurity. So you can see that we have major challenges, and on top of that, we have an increasing world population. And all that then in turn affects their health, the well-being, and all the other aspects. Now, those points I mentioned may appear as discrete, but the reality is they all stem from the same root cause, and that's what our research has shown us. It's a multi-level coordination failure, because if you really look at the food production system, we need to balance the supply and demand. If there is too much supply, food go waste, and if and also if the demand is high, the consumers will not get the food. And the timely inputs, whether it's fertilizer, pesticide, or even knowledge, is essential to optimize this system. And markets also should work effectively. And if something fails, it could be oversupply or low yield or overuse of pesticides, chemicals affecting the health. And in this system, a lot of planning happens, but depending on the weather, things can change. Availability of money plays a major role in farmers being able to buy the inputs. And various government policies are used to balance this system, but we see huge variations, especially with COVID and all that. We see even further fluctuations in this system. And anyone who has think of it as a control system, you will see this is as an open loop system, which is very hard to balance. Now, if we look at this notion of food security, because it's essential to secure the health, the income, poverty levels, all that. To achieve the food security, we need to do certain actions, and millions of people need to act in a coordinated way, from harvesting, selecting seeds, buying, selling. And those actions is what is going to give us the food security. And those actions should increase the food production as well as efficient distribution. Now, what controls the actions, what governs those actions is the knowledge. So you can see this whole chain of knowledge leading to actions, which then can create these coordinated outcomes. And this is more generic, not only specific to food health everywhere. The knowledge plays a critical role in this process. And we coming from IT has a big opportunity. We have a digitally connected society, whether it is the mobiles, the IoTs, there are so many devices per person today, even in the rural parts of the world. And we find the farmers in the rural corners of the earth also having access to mobile phones. But in our work, we take a very crucial position about these farmers and the mobile phone and the technology. We see this as a sensor in a hand of a human, which is very much used to empower, augment, amplify the actions, rather than trying to replace a person with technology. So that's a major thing which has helped us to find quite a lot of very interesting outcomes by thinking of how we can augment the person rather than replacing. So with that, I will show how it all matters. And this is the project we are working on currently, about to deploy the applications in this particular area, which is in the north part of India, where they have this canal, which is 125 kilometers long, providing irrigation water to 43,000 hectares. There are 55,000 farmers we are working with, and they are organized into 123 what is known as water use association. So this is a Google map. This is one of the major rivers, Godavari River. There's a dam, and this is the canal area that we are working on. And all these green dots represent gates to control the flow of water in this canal. Now the challenge is, if they keep the water in the canal all the time, water gets lost due to seepage and evaporation. So what the government authorities have been trying is to provide water in these canals to match what farmers are growing at the right time. So you can see it is a coordination challenge of knowing what farmers are growing and then controlling these 100+ gates in a way to optimize the water flow to get the maximum productivity from that water. So this project has the aim of increasing the on-farm water efficiency, but not only that, the farmers, what they grow, they need to sell as well. So market linkages also a crucial part of this whole project. So how do we do this? So the objective is to create an intervention using the technology to enhance the water distribution and management to the agricultural land, increase the yield, enhance market linkages, reduce logistic and transaction costs through data-driven planning and efficient coordination. But what is more important is not only the intervention we are thinking, how we sustain this intervention. Because we know there's a lot of projects that are happening. There is project funding, people come do the project, funding finishes, people go. So how can we do this in a sustainable way? And we are adopting a very interesting concept, which is the value co-creation. A lot of partners come together, work together with farmers, help farmers to increase the value. And then we are looking at way to share that value so that among the partners, including farmers, giving the major share to the farmers, so that intervention can be sustained in this area. Now, having said that, that is what I showed you is one canal. In this particular state of India, there's 312 such canals. What we are working is a medium-sized canal, which is a good representation of the potential for this type of intervention. So what's the intervention? So we have developed a technology platform, and the intervention is we work with the universities or the knowledge partners, get the information about how to grow crops into the platform. and we convert that into what is known as actionable information. I will later explain all the technologies, but I'll first give the overview. We convert that knowledge into actionable information and provide it to the farmers to plan their crops through their mobile apps. So farmers can start planning and they say, look, I'm going to grow 1 acre of onions or 2 acres of maize. We collect that information and we aggregate. And when we know the acreage and the crop, there are tables, we can create the aggregated water demand, which we then pass on to the water controllers who control the gates. Once they get this information, they plan when to open the gates and create a schedule, and they give that schedule back to the platform. And from that, we can work out when each individual farmland will get water, and that is given to the farmers. Now, farmers, when they know the water availability, can decide when to plant and start planting activities, and then we provide the knowledge to guide the planting process. But also, once we know what they are planting and the dates they are planting, we can work out, compute when they need various inputs. So we know what farmers need, when they need the fertilizer, when they need the pesticides, we aggregate and create aggregated input markets. So the farmers now can buy in bulk, and logistic providers can organize the transportation back to the farmers. Also, we know when the farmers are growing based on the planting date and the duration for harvest, how much harvest will come, when it is come, that we aggregate, and we create aggregated markets, and we sell it to the buyers. And we all know that if we are buying it in bulk or selling it in bulk, always we get the price advantage and the bargaining power. And then through the logistic providers, the harvest will get transported to the right location. So this is the intervention. So how do we do it at this scale, and how, while sitting in Australia, do a project in India? It's quite interesting. This whole project is sponsored by the World Bank Water Resources Group. They're very keen to see this happening because they are connected with many other Asian countries where this similar problem exists. And we are being sponsored by the Maharashtra government Water Resource Department, which controls the canal system. And this has been a major problem for them, and they are very happy to see a potential solution. We work with an NGO called Yuva Mitra, which is a reputed NGO in that area, and they are the people that is going to take in this solution to the farmers. So from here, we do a train the trainer. They take this and take it to the farmers and talk to them in their language and explain all this. And then we have been joined by 2 startup companies in the local area, Ekatvam and Vestago. They are specializing in groundwater availability and help to actually plan the water schedules much accurately, considering the groundwater. Vestago has developed a Uber type model to provide the logistics. So they make use of the local people who has got transportation, and they have coordination systems to manage the flow of material. And we are in discussion with a local agriculture university who is going to provide us with the knowledge. So you can see, using this type of technology platform, we can create a local digital ecosystem, empowering not only the farmers, the local startups, the government agencies, the universities, NGOs, all to come together to tackle a very important point. And we are about to launch this app, and farmers will start using it for the coming season starting end of October. So where is the value creation in this? I mean, here's some very simple economics, just to show the power of an approach like this, because we provide the knowledge, and based on the knowledge, farmers can plan the effective crops to grow. And also we aggregate the planned crops and the inputs required and coordinate the inputs. That means they are assured the water inputs are delivered at the right time to their farm, as well as they have planted the most efficient variety of the crop. So, and they are being given knowledge as to how best to grow that, all that combined to produce a higher yield. As well as we know what they are producing when the harvest will be available, we aggregate and create these commodity markets. So all these will result in efficient supply chains, both upstreams and downstreams, which means here the reduced cost to farmers, higher farm gate prices, and overall minimizing the waste, which I mentioned, there's huge amount of waste. So if you do some simple numbers, typical numbers for maize, which is a very common crop in this area, yield per acre is about 3,000 kilograms. And typical selling price at the farm gate is 12 rupees, Indian rupees. A farmer will get from a season 36,000 rupees. And their cost of production is about 15,000, and they make an income of about 20,000 rupees. Now, with this intervention through knowledge, our aim is over 2-3 crop seasons to increase the product yield by 25%, so that it will be 3,715. And through the efficiencies in the downstream supply chain to increase the farm gate price by about 20%. So that will change this income revenue from 36,000 to 54,000. And also the efficiencies in the upstream side to reduce the costs by 20%, where 15,000 will reduce to 12,000. So their net profit is now 41,000. In other words, by just working on 3 areas simultaneously in a synchronized manner, we can double the farm income, which is a major target of Indian government, but they have not been able to achieve this by individually trying this, but by combining, it can be done. And that's why these government agencies and world banks are very interested to see the outcome of this trial. Now, how does that platform work? We are all familiar with the printed map, which is information. And we have tried to go places with this, and we know it's very hard. But today we don't even look at this. We have it in a GPS, same information. Difference is when you're at a point, it says turn left, turn right, go straight, which has enabled millions to drive. And when there are so many people driving, you capture how fast they are going, and you create a traffic map. Now, when you're at a junction, it says this is the shortest, but this is the fastest. So that knowledge helps you to optimize your time or the effort. So if you take that into the agriculture domain, this is the Indian Handbook of Agriculture. No farmer has read this. And with the technologies we have developed, which is ontological technologies with inferencing, we have converted this into apps which can guide them what to grow, where to grow, and on a day by day, looking at the sensors data, they will be guided like this. And also they will be guided what other farmers are doing, like the traffic map. So if there's going to be a saturation, that will be indicated by red. Now, that simple concept is again using technology we have created into a bigger system. The published knowledge get reorganized into an ontological knowledge base. Through the app, again, you can see this app is not to facilitate transaction, but to empower. Because I said at the very beginning, our main aim is to augment the person and help them to achieve their goals, which is here the revenue. They can identify choices, make decisions, etc. And the information flow is matched to this empowerment cycle. And the decisions they make is based on the confidence, sense of control, motivation, self-efficacy. So you can bridge the internal working of a human to the flow of information and empower them in making decisions. And that is one of the key ideas of augmenting the farmers and their abilities in this project. So these are some of the app screens which is being launched now, where they can select the crops through a calendar. They can get day-by-day instructions, and if they go to instruction, they get more detailed instructions. This is multilingual. This is the English version for this presentation, but it's in the local languages, which we give it to the farmers. But the basic idea is context-specific actionable information, give that higher yield. And the other important thing is, if you look at it in another perspective, Research Institute ontological knowledge bases, once we give that, the farmer actions are captured and we create what is known as market intelligence. So here we have the technologies of predictive modeling, data mining, all that to generate this market intelligence. And once we have the market intelligence, we can then start streamlining the buying, logistics, supplies, inputs, commodity markets, financial services, all that. And over time, when we have enough data, AI, machine learning, data sciences, all that will start to generate new knowledge to enhance the whole ecosystem. And some of the key aspects of this whole thing is the aggregated marketing, because I mentioned there's two things. One is increasing yield, other one is the collective aggregated marketing, buying and selling. Now for that also, from the mobile app with the technology, we have developed a contract negotiator, and the buyers also in this ecosystem will have apps. They will see the aggregated harvest coming, and the contract negotiator will negotiate the prices. And when a contract is done, it will get recorded in the blockchain network that is getting deployed at the moment. So we are again bringing another set of technology to enable this whole ecosystem. And these are some screenshots of the buyer's app, which you saw the seller's app, where this is the actual area in India where this project is launched. And a buyer in this system can see the total produce coming from this area, and they can bid for it. The contract negotiator will work out the prices. Once it's done, it's being recorded in the blockchain. And at the time, once the contract is executed, the logistics suppliers will move the material and the monies will get paid. So we are using technology to automate this whole process so that it can scale. So coming to sort of look at it, we have all these devices from the IT's point of view, the big data analytics, the RFIDs, IoTs, blockchains, cloud computing. And actually this links to what Anthony was saying earlier, that in order to find solutions, we need to think of it as systems of systems. Instead of, if you look at one thing at a time, we find it very hard and it will not create an impact. But once you start to think of it as systems of systems, we can find the answers which I showed, which will help us to achieve the first 3 sustainable development goals, such as no poverty, zero hunger, and good health and well-being, because they are all dependent. Trying to do this, if they are not poor, if they are poor, if they don't have the money, or if they don't have the nutritional food, it's not going to work, because they are all connected. So I will conclude with this slide. If you are going to look at the zero hunger, good health and well-being, and no poverty, I think the key is to have this effective food production and distribution system, which will help us to achieve these 3 sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Atula. And there's a lot to digest in what you've done. And you make it look like you just magically did all this quickly and easily, coordinating hundreds of people across multiple languages and platforms. And, you know, it really is a monumental effort that's gone into it. So our next presenter is Anna Green. For those of you who don't know Anna, she's now the head of small and medium business within Amazon Web Services for the Asia Pacific and Japan region. And she comes to Amazon with a wealth of experience prior in the corporate world and in banking, and she's a very sought after speaker for her perspectives on a range of things, but today on equality. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Anna.
Hi, Elena, and hello, audience, for our conversation today. It is my pleasure to join you today. I'm just going to share my screen so we can get going with my presentation. So today's conversation is going to be about diversity and inclusion in technology. As Alana said, my name is Anna Green. I am the head of the small and medium business team across Asia, Pacific and Japan. So that includes countries as diverse as Japan, Korea, Australia and New Zealand, India, all of our ASEAN countries, and everything in between. So it's an amazing cohort of customers. It's an amazing cohort of diverse and communities of thought and of practice. And it is my pleasure and honour to join you today to be speaking about a topic that I'm very passionate about, which is how do we look at and think about diversity and inclusion where it comes to technology. Just a bit of background about myself. Prior to this role, I ran the digital native businesses across Asia, Pacific and Japan at AWS. And prior to that, I was the CEO of a bank in the Philippines, and then before that in Laos. So I have a lot of context in terms of the way that diversity and inclusion metrics and conversations are important at a corporate level across all of the organizations in which I've operated. And then for better or worse, I'm also a lawyer by trade. So my technical expertise in understanding about how diversity and inclusion impacts from a legal context is also an important one as I've thought about the way that we have run our business at AWS, but the other businesses that I have also led in my career. So without further ado, I would like to kick off the discussion about diversity and inclusion here in technology as it relates to what we've been doing at AWS. So importantly, I guess the conversation needs to begin with why is this important? And I would say that it's important for a number of reasons. It's always interesting for me to have this conversation because often we find the conversation can revolve around it being the right thing to do. So certainly from my experience, it is the right thing to do. Having a diverse and inclusive audience of people and employees is the right thing to do, simply because it makes sense. You know, as we are building and growing our societies, people are understanding that old rules with respect to a single point of view running businesses really just don't make sense in the consumer society that we're building and growing. So it's the right thing to do. And obviously from a personal perspective, it's the right thing to do. I'm obviously a female leader, but it also makes business sense. And this is a really important thing not to forget when we have this conversation. Having a diverse and inclusive community of employees actually makes you much better able to pivot in situations relating to business challenges and also think differently about the type of business solutions that you're building for your customers. So I've referenced a quote here, which I think is really valuable when we're thinking about this conversation. There is ample evidence that diverse and inclusive companies are more likely to make better, bolder decisions, which is a critical capability in a crisis. For example, diverse teams have been shown to be able to radically innovate and anticipate shifts in consumer needs and consumption patterns. So again, this is not just about it being the right thing to do. When you have a diverse range of people represented across your business making business decisions, you're likely to be leveraging off very different perspectives. And that has been super important in what our entire business community has been facing into in these last 2 years. Work from home environments, the way in which consumers want to consume not just data, but retail goods and services. These are all things that are not done by only one type of person, they're done by all consumers. So representing all consumers in your business does make business sense. And there's been a lot of recent studies that have pointed us to that conclusion. one of which was McKinsey, who recently did a study in 2019, stating that the most gender diverse companies were 48% more likely to perform better than the least gender diverse companies. So there are actual performance metrics that drive this outcome that tell us that when you have a diverse range of people who are sitting not just across your organization from an employee perspective, but also diverse leaders end up making better decisions for the business, which end up giving you an outcome that is not just better for the people, but also your business, and I would add for the communities in which you're operating. So where are we now? Really important conversation or question to ask, because often, and I know that there is a lot in terms of media coverage around how we're seeing equality play out, diversity play out in the workplaces, but it is important just to stop and focus on where we are now. And where we are right now is that we still see a pay gap with respect to men and women in the workplace. So using Australia as an example, 47% of all employees in Australia are female, but on average, they take home $250 a week less than men. And indeed, that's a problem because it means that we're not seeing an equitable outcome from a remuneration perspective. It also another statistic that is a challenge for us is that there is a real lack of females in the IT workforce. So we have 1 in 4 employees in IT right now in Australia that are female. And again, if we are trying to build products and solutions that are catering for a consumer audience, and I think that the statistics around the way in which women are consuming goods and services are really compelling in this context. Women are consuming just as much as men. I'm sure all of you out there would agree with that. And therefore, a lack of a female voice when we are building products and solutions for our customers is not a good outcome for customers or for businesses. So that statistic, 1 in 4 employees in IT are female, I believe there's still work to be done there. We also see an underrepresentation of females in leadership generally. So the ASX 200 has board members that are female are 1 in 3 right now. There has been a slight increase in that year on year, certainly up from 10 years ago, but nowhere near where it needs to be able to start to see parity. And as I said, to be able to shift the dial in terms of the contexts and the conversations that we are able to have at a boardroom level that represent a gender diverse view of the way in which we are building business. So then the question has to be, how do we make meaningful change in this space? So there has been a lot of work being done around this. And lots of the large consulting firms are diving deep on things like quotas, awareness, mentorship, sponsoring, and there are mixed results with respect to these things, because what we're learning about the way that women work and the diversity metrics in the business is that women and men still do operate differently. So what I'd like to do is now just focus on a couple of things that a recent 2021 BCG study have identified and as breaking down success with respect to a few key factors and actions in terms of getting women to participate and build and grow careers, and particularly so in technology. So the first one is early promotion. So it's a really interesting and compelling fact or data point for me. Nearly 1 in 2 women said that their first promotion was pivotal for their career. And this is a really important statistic because it's not the same for men. Men don't reflect on their career progression as being that first moment that somebody took a chance on them and helped them to build and grow their career was not pivotal for them. But what we hear from anecdotes for women is that when they are promoted, when somebody invests in them early in their career, it makes a difference to their own capacity to lean in and take chances and risks on building out their career and taking the next step in terms of building up their skill set into a new role. So 44% of women said that their first promotion was the most important versus 32% of men. And then I've got a quote in here that's relevant. So Stephanie Carullo, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Box, has said, "Our boss encouraged all of us to take our first line manager role. And then after 18 months, pushed us to take a second line manager role. If not for her initial nudge, I'm not sure any of us would have done it on our own. And I can certainly tell you from my experience of women in the workplace, there is a need for women to be mentored and sponsored. It's something that I have seen and experienced that men do naturally. It seems to be something that women don't necessarily do or are comfortable with doing naturally, which is seeking out support from and guidance from more senior people and asking them to help them on their career journey. So this is a really key metric and one that I've seen in practice as being a challenge for women. So what we need to do here is make sure that we're building the confidence of women and providing them with that initial nudge to move into larger or perhaps more expansive roles in their careers. So the second key success factor is to understand the difference between risk tolerance for men and women. So women are 10% less likely to be comfortable taking risks than men, and 66% of men are comfortable taking risks and managing ambiguity versus 56% of women. And I would say that, again, that is something that I have seen in practice. And oftentimes that's a function of several things. Women are less likely to take risks simply because sometimes their family situation doesn't allow them to do so. And this is something that we need to be thinking about as we're building our workplaces of the future. Implementing things like flexible working hours, allowing parental leave, both for men and women. These are things that make a difference to the way that women feel about both leaving the workforce if they have a need to for parental reasons, coming back, and taking a risk with their careers in terms of where they are in their career trajectory. Because what we see certainly in developing countries like Australia is a lot of women are planning to take time out of their career journey to be able to take time out to be a parent. And we need to be thinking differently about how we make that an expansive conversation so that it's not just women who are accommodated to do that, and so that we are seeing men take that opportunity to take on parental responsibilities in the same way. The other part about this is that women are less likely to seek a promotion if they aren't qualified. So 41% of women went for multiple promotions where they didn't meet all the qualifications, but 51% of men sought multiple qualifications if they weren't qualified. And again, this is just a factual statement around the way in which men and women approach the opportunity to progress in their career. And it is a statement of fact that women are simply less inclined to apply for jobs if they're not 100% qualified and they feel that they carry 100% of the technical skill set to do that job, whereas men are more inclined to do it and back themselves into the things that perhaps they might have 70% and then they can do the rest of the 30% learning on the job. It's a different mindset, and what it means is that men are more likely to take risks in their careers and therefore to progress. So any opportunity that you or the people around you or the organisation that you are in can do to support and create mentorship channels to foster confidence for women to act and be comfortable with ambiguity is really going to help the women in your organisation to build and grow themselves and their careers. Now, this one we touched on earlier, which is changing jobs. Both men and women agreed that changing jobs was a critical factor in career advancement, but women changed employers less often than men. And 8% less women had more than 3 employers as compared to men. So women feel less inclined to move employers for a number of reasons. The first is that they tend to consider how their move could impact the closest to them. So they care about moving employers because it can affect their family situation. And also they tend to be more invested in their current team and they care about what they're building with their current team. Whereas we find that men don't consider those things in the same way. Secondly, they're less likely to stay connected with mentors over a prolonged period of time. And external opportunities will often surface as a result of your staying in connection or in contact with your mentors. So again, very important, nuanced understandings of the way that men and women approach opportunities in the workplace, so that when we're thinking about building jobs or building pipelines and bench strength for women as they build and progress their careers, these are important things to understand about the way that women think about moving jobs and make allowances for or make environments amenable to these type of issues. So I'm often asked about these things, and I like to start with statistics because it's really important for us just to level set. There is a gap in terms of pay. There's also a challenge around the way in which women progress because of challenges that they face in the organisation. None of this ever, in my view, is being done in an intentional fashion, but it is really important to understand it if we're going to change it. So I'm often asked, what is AWS doing? And I acknowledge from the outset that it really is a journey. You know, those statistics with respect to women in technology apply across the board, and AWS is doing everything that we can to change that. We've got a long way to go, but we are trying to architect change in this context. So what we've done is that we have internal programs and processes, obviously, that we're building around helping to change the way that women feel about building careers here at AWS. But we also have built a couple of really impactful community programs where we're actually going out to the communities in which you operate and breaking down stereotypes around women having jobs in technology. And I think this panel and this conversation certainly speaks to the fact that there are some pretty amazing, intelligent, capable, and really accomplished women doing amazing things in technology. And I really see it as my job to make sure that everyone in the community understands that there are some fantastic women doing great things in technology, both so women feel comfortable in that context and applying for roles in a technology context as well. So at AWS, we've built a program called She Builds. It's a program that is aimed at building diverse communities, closing skill gaps around certifications with respect to building technology skills around cloud, and amplifying marginalised voices in technology. So when we say marginalised, often we're talking about the fact that women don't often get a platform to speak about what they're doing in a technology context. And we're really trying to change that with the She Builds program. We've had over 12,000 people participating. It's open to everyone, but obviously our target audience is the women and LGBTQ plus community who would like to get involved and learn more about careers in technology. And we've really tried to build programs that help women to get trained, mentored and certified in technology. And we have 150, so if anyone wants to know whether or not there's interest in the market from women, we've had 157% growth in our membership in this particular program since 2020. So there's no shortage of women out there who are interested in engaging, getting to be part of this very exciting industry that we're all operating in, which is actually building and growing the future of all of the communities in which we're operating. We've also built something called She Dares, and it's a free program curriculum which is organised across various APJ countries, and it's designed to help women overcome perceived barriers to seeking a job in technology. So a lot of women that we speak to about why would you not think about a career in technology often see it as a very male-dominated and technically focused career path. And of course, we all know that that is not necessarily the case. Technology companies have all manner of different types of people and skill sets that they need in the same way that a bank or an insurance or logistics or any other type of business needs to build and grow. So there's a huge number of different skills that can be applied to a job in technology. What's exciting about a job in technology is the opportunity to move, the opportunity to build and grow what you're learning about your own job, but also build and grow into another one. So we've had over 3,000 people, women, completing this program in Australia and New Zealand, and we are actually building and growing it more broadly. So it's a very short summary of diversity and inclusion and why it's important for us to be thinking about it in the context of technology. But I really value the opportunity to speak to this audience and make sure that they understand that there are some amazing women doing fantastic things in technology. As I said, this panel full of allies and also quite amazing women doing extraordinary things in technology. There is an opportunity for all women to build a career in technology. And I really thank IFIP for the opportunity to have this conversation and really just keep the conversation going. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Anna. What a wonderful way to end my Wednesday. I've got like 2 hours of people who actually inspire me to do better in my work. So thank you for that, and as well as all of the previous speakers. And we'll have some more questions that'll be put into the Q&A afterwards, and we'll have an additional panelist from AWS joining us as well at that time. But before we get to there, we have Dr. Sylvia Pfeiffer. Another amazing person today on the panel, has had an outstanding relationship, not only within industry, government, and where she is now, but developing some of all of the video streaming services that we use on a daily basis. And so, you know, I kind of bowed down when I read your profile. It's unbelievable the work that you've done, both in research with industry and academia and other. And I'm really looking forward to learning from you in what is now your work in that telehealth space. So without further ado, we'll pass it over to Sylvia.
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. And thanks for that wonderful introduction. I have in the past indeed worked in larger organizations and helped with standardization in healthcare. But today I've come to speak to you about equity of access in healthcare. So let me see if I can get that screen sharing working. And full screen. Does that work? Yep, good. Excellent. So I'm Sylvia Pfeiffer, and I'm the CEO of a company called CoView. At CoView, we develop video consultation technology. So it's a bit like, you know, your Zoom here, but it's actually meant for a clinical use case. And that changes the way in which we use technology quite substantially. But first, a little bit about myself. I've got a PhD in computer science, an MBA in business management and computer science, and I came to Australia in 1999 to work on web video technology. So I've got these 20 years of experience developing web video technology and standards. I've worked for Google, for Mozilla, and for CSIRO. And CoView, my company, is a spin-out from the CSIRO. So we created CoView as a consequence of working on video conferencing technology in the browser. I've even written a book about video technology and video telehealth for primary care, GPs and allied health practitioners specifically, and how to introduce that into your practice. This was written in 2019, sorry. Mixing up my centuries here. In 2019, so before the pandemic, but became obviously quite relevant during the pandemic. The CoView is a CSIRO spin-out, was created in 2018, and it is now the #1 telehealth software used in Australia. And we're catering for all different kinds of practitioners, be that in allied health, GPs. We're used in hospitals, public hospitals across West Australia, ACT, Victoria, and South Australia. And are also used through Health Direct as a free platform by all GPs in the country. About a third of all GPs are now on our platform, so you might have actually used it already. Overall, in 2020, we delivered 3 million consultations through our platform. So very grateful for the number of clinicians that have jumped on our platform to really help through the COVID crisis. And overall, we've now delivered over 5 million video consultations. So if you compare that, for example, to a company like American Well, which is listed in the US, they're doing about, or did at the height of COVID, 45,000 consultations daily. We currently do 20,000. And at the height of COVID last year, we did 25,000 consultations a day. So from a impact point of view, we're delivering about as much impact as MWell, maybe half that much impact as MWell, but value-wise and, we're not listed, we're not worth several $billion. We're still a relatively small Australian company delivering just a lot of value for our country. And that value has particularly come across during the pandemic. We've actually actively helped save some of the healthcare practices. They wouldn't have known what to do and how to deliver care to their patients without CoView around. You will notice the similarity of name between CoView and COVID. That is a complete accident. We were named we picked that name in 2015, and when the pandemic came, we just did not want to change our name. So we're help solving challenges of healthcare practices moving to a digital healthcare workflow online with functionalities such as online scheduling, a waiting area. Think of it like a waiting area in a physical practice. Patients coming in, waiting with music and being picked up by a clinician or by a receptionist to be triaged. We do this check-in. We deliver the face-to-face or the virtual consultation. We support payments. We satisfy regulatory requirements, and we just give clinicians flexibility that would not otherwise be possible. And that's very important. Because if you think about it, running an online business is not that different to running an in-person healthcare business. It is completely possible to deliver care online. However, you don't have to pay for a physical practice. You don't have to pay the rent for it. You could actually deliver this from home, or you can have part of your workforce working from home and thus make better use of your physical space. So it actually reduces your expenditure, and that allows you to reach more people, to actually give more people access to care. And this is where I'm going with today's talk, talking about equity of access to healthcare through telehealth. Now, equity to access is defined as providing care that does not vary in quality because of personal characteristics such as gender, ethnicity, geographic location, and socioeconomic status. So quality of care is important to us. We want to make sure that the quality of care that we are experiencing in an in-person consultation is delivered also in a telehealth consultation. I'll get to that in a minute. But one thing I also want to point out is the personal characteristics. So we've got a psychiatrist on our platform. This is where this picture stems from. He's actually offering telehealth, and that's psychiatrists telehealth, through our online application to homeless people living in cars or on the street. All they have is a mobile phone, and that's all they need in order to get healthcare. They would never dare walk into a clinician's practice, but they can get it online. And the psychiatrist has told us that he could close his practice, and he was now practicing basically from the basement of his parents' place, where he's looking after his ailing parents and really taking care of them, while at the same time sharing his knowledge and his capabilities in helping other people through psychiatry through an online application. And that's really, really impactful, because suddenly we're reaching people that absolutely need this care through a medium that is open to them, that makes them feel comfortable because they can talk to somebody on the phone and they're getting the care they need. So there is an opportunity for patients to get access to care that otherwise they would not get. And I want to point out that this is also important, not just during the pandemic, but generally. People can get better care online sometimes than in person, because it's either, the local GP or the local psychiatrist, the local psychologist, or none at all. So if you're living in a rural area and you only have access to the local GP, and that GP isn't actually qualified in the area, not deeply qualified, knowledgeable in the area, obviously they are qualified, but not specialized in the area that where you have an illness, maybe a mental illness or something like that, you can't get the best care. While if you're looking online, you might be able to find the clinician with the specialization that you're after. So you can receive better care. You can obviously receive care earlier through a telephone or telehealth call, because it's easier to access and easier to connect with. And you might not need to wait for weeks and weeks at a time, because the clinician might be able to fit you in much faster. It's obviously more convenient, and that's really important for patients that find it hard to leave their homes. So that could be a mental health patient that is afraid of leaving the house and just doesn't want to be amongst people. It's for people that don't have a driver's license and can't take themselves to a doctor. It's for families where it's really busy at home and they can't get away to look after the health of a child potentially. And it's also for older people that find it really hard sometimes just to get to the local GP or to get to the specialist that they need, because they can't travel by themselves. So convenience is very important. And then again, reaching people that would otherwise not receive care. Not receiving care is the hardest and most unequitable access to care that we have, meaning no access to care, and telehealth absolutely enables that. And this is shown by the diversity of customers that we have. So on our platform, we have COVID-19 clinics, mental health practitioners, there's people looking after chronic disease, and then simple things like script renewals, dietetics, speech therapy, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, counseling, GP services, specialist services, by all types of organizations. That includes clinical research organizations, non-government organizations, work health, rehabilitation, aged care, universities, schools, you name it. There's a lot of healthcare happening across a lot of different types of companies. And we're with CoView, we're so happy to enable all of these healthcare consultations to be taking place. Now, I mentioned before quality of care, and I want to go a little bit more into that aspect, because if we're talking about reducing health inequalities and improving access, we actually want to make sure that by doing that, we don't reduce the quality of care. So I've looked up the criteria by the WHO, the World Health Organization, about what quality of care means. And that's these 6 different aspects: safe access to care, effective, timely, efficient, equitable, and people-centered. So those are the criteria for high quality care. And what I've done is I've compared in-person consults to a telehealth consult, and where each one has an advantage over the other and potentially a disadvantage. So safety is an interesting aspect, because you might think it's safer to see somebody in person, because they can better look at you, they can touch you, which can decrease medical errors. And that's very true. But at the same time, safety is not just from the in-person consult. It's also the whole environment that you're being put under just to see that person. So I've heard of people that on their way to the doctor, to a specialist, have had an accident. And so you wouldn't be exposed to that. Obviously, infections is a big thing. We've had that through the pandemic. Safety is also something that I don't like writing down, but people are getting, there is inappropriate touch happening sometimes as well at doctors. So that was definitely not possible in telehealth, and that's a safety aspect that can't be underestimated for certain populations in our society. So safety is important. Effectiveness. In-person consults are obviously quite effective, particularly if you're able to use medical devices. But the lack of devices and touch can be made up for through adapting the medical devices to sending them home to patients. So patients can actually use some medical devices at home and potentially under supervision by a remote clinician. The other things we can do is actually have the clinicians adapt to the lack of specific devices, and their scientific knowledge is adequate no matter whether it's an in-person consult or a telehealth consult. So they just have to think about different ways of getting the information that they need. So if they can't touch, they might guide somebody who is nearby the patient on how to use their hand to do the analysis that they would otherwise do. Another advantage for effectiveness is actually, because telehealth is so easy to do, you can have more frequent interactions with the clinicians. You can check in more often, and that will reduce the risk that something goes wrong between the time frames that you're seeing a person in-person consult. So these shorter contact times will actually help us avoid missing a change in the health of a patient. It's also about being timely. In-person consults are often delayed because people are very busy. Whereas, and particularly if you miss a consult and you're no-show, then your next consult might be a long time away. But if you've missed or forgotten that you had a consult for telehealth, that doesn't mean you have to miss the consultation, because the clinician might just call you and you can still have that consultation. You don't have to travel, so you can actually immediately check in. There's no delay in providing care, and it allows a huge flexibility both for the clinician and the patient of location where they need to be to get the care. Efficiency is another big aspect. In-person consultations, we can sometimes maximize resource use. For example, we don't have to duplicate medical devices between patients. We can share medical devices between patients. But also, we might be using too many things that need to be replaced between patients. So for example, one thing that we don't need in telehealth is PPE. Personal protective gear would need to be changed between patients in an in-person consult. That doesn't need to be done in telehealth. So it avoids creating waste, and it also reduces waste of time, because you can be very quick between patients in a telehealth consult. So it also has the ability for cost savings. Equitable is an important aspect, and in-person consult is actually less equitable than a telehealth consult, because it's location dependent. Where you live, where you are, decides who you can access and what quality of care you get. Whereas in a telehealth situation, equitable access is much better, because you get your reach is so much broader. You can reach so many more clinicians, no matter where they are. You can get access to them, and your socioeconomic status would not have as much of an influence. Particularly for Medicare reimbursed consultations, of course, where money is required, that there still is a difference. People-centered is the last criterion, and in-person consultations allow for a certain community to be accessed that only lives around the clinician, so for local practice only. Whereas with telehealth, you can actually create people-centered care that is community specific. So a clinician that has a specific community in mind that they're wanting to help. Let's say there's a clinician that is focused on one particular illness. Let's say they're focused on endometriosis or something. You can get all the you can access a whole community of endometriosis patients through telehealth across all of Australia, and it actually helps because you can actually create help between your patients as well, and create more community around community exchange around the service that you're providing. So there are advantages and disadvantages of telehealth, but the disadvantages are often pointed out much more than the advantages. And so I wanted to make sure that we're clear that there are also a lot of advantages of telehealth over in-person consultations. We've in fact done some consumer research, and we've asked over 1,000 Australians what their preference is for seeing GPs. This page just shows you that the gender of the people that we've asked, their current age and where they live. It was quite equitably representative of an Australian population. So it's not specifically focused on one particular state or age group. The data is very accessible in that way. So we've asked, have you ever used video telehealth? And interestingly enough, about 3/4 of the people that we've asked have used telehealth. So that's very encouraging. Of those, over 90% said that their video telehealth experience was positive. And 70% said that the quality of care that they received was the same. 13% said it was worse, and 16% it was better. So there's actually people that think it is better than going in person. Then we asked some more questions. Do you think video telehealth consultations should be offered by all GPs? 70% agreed with that. So there's definitely a change in our population happening, that everyone is really interested in having an ability to access video telehealth. Now the bottom left one, if you haven't used video telehealth before, what's the main reason for this? This is an interesting insight, because we can see that 40% still prefer seeing GPs in person, but 40% didn't use video telehealth, 42%, because it wasn't actually offered by their GP. So population is embracing the idea. 70% want to have that kind of access, but the GPs haven't all embraced it. 40% haven't offered it yet. So we're still in very much the initial transition stages of digital transformation in healthcare. This bottom right one is quite interesting to maybe take back to your own personal GP. If you have a choice between a GP that offers video telehealth and one that doesn't, would you consider switching to the one that does? Over 44% said that they would consider switching. So there's also a choice now happening by consumers that want to be looking for GPs that offer them a choice to be seeing their clinician in person or via video telehealth. So final thoughts on the value of access to care through telehealth. We are very proud to have delivered those 5 million telehealth consultations, because they mean millions of people have been saved from exposure to infections. And access to care was enabled for people in isolation or lockdown, infectious patients at home, immunocompromised patients that might not even be able to get vaccinated, that will continue to want to use telehealth, rural patients, because they cannot typically access the same quality of care as everyone else. It reduces their need for travel and thus reduces pollution. Homeless people, like the examples that I mentioned before. And finally, also people struggling to leave their homes, either because of mental health or because they are older and less mobile. So telehealth is here to stay and a powerful means for more equitable access to care. Thank you very much for allowing me to share this information with you.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thanks to all of our panelists. We'll now be joined by an additional panelist, Ashmeet Kalra, who's also from Amazon Web Services, where she is a senior solutions architect. So I might start the question off for everybody. So we'll try to bring it on a positive perspective. In your experience, working on all the projects you have over your lifetime, what is one surprising element where you thought it would be a barrier to equality, but it turns out it was less of a barrier than you thought? So that's the first question, and open to any panelist. Or were they all just barriers and there was no easy answer to any of the barriers?
Maybe I'll add something here. So as a female founder, I've always found it quite difficult to get access to funding into our startup. Now, I believe that there is a certain, bias of investors against equality of investment in men and women and quite generally in a more diverse base. But I've actually found that if you can prove that your ideas are working, you will actually be investable and you'll be able to get access to investment. So it's a matter of persistence rather than worrying too much about who you are and how unequal the world is. Sometimes you just have to go past it.
Okay, anyone else with a different perspective or different?
So if I'm to take it, because my work is equity in the dimension of socioeconomics, the rich and the poor. And I think a major belief we have is there are experts and the people who get the information, in this case farmers, they are just empty vessels who needs to receive this information from the experts. But what we found was, no, they also have very rich source of knowledge. And that whole idea of the producer-consumer notion of knowledge is false. And actually we are moving from that to co-creation, where we make them equal partners in that process from a socioeconomic point of view, that we need to make them equal, treat them equal, and we have enough evidence to show such approaches are really scaling up in a very big way.
Thank you, Atula. I might ask a more specific question to Ashmeet and Anna. This question's come from a member today, wanting to know how can universities and education institutions better improve gender equality in STEM? Thoughts from industry.
So I'll do a quick one and then pass over to you, Ashmeet, who can actually probably speak to in practice what we're seeing in the industry in terms of young women, early careers, starting their careers in technology. What I would say is that there's a general perception from the early careers candidates that I speak to. There is a general perception, as I said earlier, that technology is very much a technically based career, and that is the only thing that you can do in a technology career is to be involved in coding. So what I would suggest is for universities who are interested in having a more diverse profile for their early careers and their STEM courses is to really make sure that they double down on the diversity of careers that you can build with a technology education. And I mean, Ashmeet is a wonderful case in point. So I will pass to her. I'm sure she has some context on that in terms of, what she sees when young women think about careers in technology.
Thank you, Anna. Good evening, everyone. I think I come from a background where especially I have gone through a journey where I've seen when I was doing my engineering, I was the only one in my classroom, whether I was in India or I was in New Zealand when I did my master's, very, very few women engineers who come up and actually make an impact. And that was kind of an impactful thing for me. In my context, the personal story, how we come across as is we're very introvert, being engineers, always behind the computers, writing lots of code, not having enough exposure to have those conversations. And the confidence level was also, not intact. And I see when I go to universities and run these programs, whether it's a She Builds program with young women, or I run the AI hackathons with some of the people in the universities, one of the patterns I observe is that lack of confidence, that lack of being on the table and having an opinion and being a part of the bigger picture. I think what we are inculcating from our side, being into this industry, is that it's the diversity is super critical, because that empowers us to bring in different opinions together and change the status quo. And this is something which won't happen in a single iteration. This is a continuous process, and we from industry constantly work with not just women in the university, but also at the school, when they're actually taking those important decisions of what they want to do next, as to the impact of science and technology, and how women can make an impact based on the kind of dynamics they bring to the table. We also make a lot of emphasis on the way we recruit in Amazon. We have a very specific recruitment process, but we also make sure that if we have we have those flexible programs for women to be able to match the requirements of what they have to do in their personal space versus in professional space, because there is always a bias, an unconscious bias, which exists when it comes to women not just doing the work on the professional side, but also responsible for the other aspects of the society. I think it starts from the very beginning. I think we need to impose the culture of education to this women, that this is not hard, this is not something which is not achievable, and doing that actively by other women in the technology industry is really significant, because it really gives them someone to look up to, someone to get that guidance right from the get-go. And I think that is what is really a beginning for all of us to do that. I still feel we have lots to uncover, we have lots to do, and we have lots to build that pathway. So it's not about technology, it's also about the mindset and the confidence which we need to inculcate as women who are already in a verge of in technology career, and bring it back to the people who really want to do that, especially women who feel that they don't have the capabilities. I will give you an example. I come from India, and if you look at the central exams which happen overall in India, we have these board exams which happen all over India, which is a common set of exams. And if you look at the toppers, the people who are the top scorers across these board exams, majority of them are women. So what happens to those women when they pass on their school and they go to the next level? Why are they not seen in engineering? Why are they not seen in the science stream? So the statistics are so obvious. What are we doing to kind of mitigate that gap which exists? And I think these are the areas where we as technology companies are investing a lot. I have been especially spending a lot of time with graduates and women who are in the school, to just understand what can we do to facilitate and support them to make sure they take that next level journey. So it's a very we're still not there, I'm very honest, but we are really working hard towards balancing that gap.
Yeah, and I just want to double down on what Ashmeet said. The statistics really do speak for themselves in this space, and it is incumbent upon, and not everybody feels comfortable coming to talk at seminars about the things that they've done. And that goes for men and women. Not everybody feels comfortable, but what I try to do is encourage women who are doing amazing things in technology, like this panel, like the people who have spoken today, to come and just talk about their experience in technology. I mean, Sylvia's run her own startup. I mean, it's just amazing. Like, that's not easy to do, and you've done it yourself, you've built it yourself. The model of business that you're able to present, hearing someone like you being demonstratively a leader in the industry and actually driving outcomes for our customers and our communities is so valuable to young women out there who are thinking to themselves, well, technology maybe not, like I'm not good at coding, and that kind of scares me. There's a technical aspect to that which I'm not aware of. It's just so valuable to have these type of conversations with senior women, not even senior women, women throughout throughout the ecosystem of technology, talking about what they're doing in technology. And that's not to say that what you're doing, Atula, is not fabulous. I love also hearing about that too. But it's wonderful for us to have a joint conversation like this, so that it's basically a conversation of equals. It's peers speaking and sharing, and so women can see, actually, do you know what? I could do that because she's someone who is like me, who looks like me, who thinks like me, who might have the same challenges that I have at home. for instance, I have 2 children. They're now 13 and 15. I'd like to say that because people don't necessarily equate a business life with a family life. And we all have lives outside work. It doesn't mean you can't be an excellent professional business leader, as Sylvia has very clearly pointed out in her presentation. So, you know, I think also it's important to be authentic about who you are when you are coming to the table and having conversations with people, and ensuring that women throughout the organisation, throughout the university, throughout education understand that there are places in technology where they can build and grow really promising and satisfying careers.
A question that, yeah, sir, go ahead, Taylor. Jim was also an amazing male champion for change, I might want to point out. So is Bauman, Jim, and Simeon, who I work with.
Yeah, I mean, the work I presented actually result of 8 PhDs. And of that 8, 6 are done by women. 2 men. When I now only thought about it, it never occurred to me, because for me, yes, everyone participated and we are working as a team. But now when I think of it, yes, 6 are women, 2 PhDs from men.
There's a couple questions that are kind of grouped together here as well. So
Alana, sorry, can I share the survey also with the audience? So I just wanna, so please, I think this is the survey we are running again as part of the survey. So please put your opinion while we are discussing. So we are asking about top 3 equality enabling initiative or technology in the next 3 years. So what you guys think would be a enabling initiative with technology in next 3 years in terms of equality? So please put it in the chat again. Put it in the menti.com, and the code is there. So I'll put it on the chat, and I'll show you at the end. So what is the result? Just put the 3 keywords on there. Thank you. Sorry, I'm not to interrupt.
There's some really solve the whole world problems questions here. So I'm going to have it open-ended. So some of the barriers have been identified by our listeners here today. And so I will just put these loaded questions to the panelists. The first loaded barrier is, how do you change the mindset at home with how children, and in particular girls, and even in my experience, students from first and family to go to university, Aboriginal, Indigenous communities, how do you change that mindset in the home and at school from the time that they're little to empower people to think that they can and build that confidence? That's the first loaded question. The second one was, one of the participants thought that it was a lot easier to build diversity into a larger company than it might be to a small and medium-sized business, by virtue of the fact, if you lose one out of 3 people to a maternity leave, that's a third of your staff gone instantly. So second loaded question. And I think that the last one was questions around design. And I think this one's a really good one. What are the lessons you've learned in how you design, whether it's not your programs or your hiring practices? What does design tell you about that implementation to help you overcome some of those equality barriers? So good luck on those ones. Who would like to go first?
I'll take the second question. Talking about small companies and the challenge of getting a diverse workforce. So CoView is very diverse. We've got people from 15 countries that originated from 15 different countries working with us, and every one of us is in Australia, except for one person who's in New Zealand. So diversity is something that you can that you just have to be open for during your hiring process. If you don't exclude people, if you actually actively look for the best qualified people, you will actually automatically create quite a diverse workforce simply by hiring the best people. Now, hiring equal amounts of women and men, particularly in the engineering department, was a big challenge for us. I'm still looking for female software engineers. What I'm seeing is that female software engineers all get snapped up by the large organizations, large technology companies, simply because there's a lot fewer of the female software engineers out there, and the large technology companies have big efforts behind trying to hire more female software engineers. So I've only ever managed to hire one other female software engineer into my company, if I can still count myself as a software engineer. So which I'm quite disappointed about, and that despite having made extensive efforts telling all the recruiters that we'd like to see more women. So really trying to encourage everyone to put more female software engineers in front of us. So I think the problem is just that there just aren't enough. And so we've got to go to the root. We've got to change it in schools. We've got to change it in universities. If we can't teach women technology in schools and tell them that this is cool and that is something for women as well, we won't get them in the workforce. And that, I think, is the key problem that we really need to address.
So there's quite a lot of data. I agree with you, Sylvia. And I think on the university piece, it's super important. There's quite a lot of data about the way, not just the future requirement for digital skills, but also existing. So I think we had a recent data point, which was that in the next 3 years, there's going to be a requirement for 7 times the digital skill set that the existing job market has, in order to be able to adapt and change to what's going on in the job market around the digitization of business. So there is an economic imperative, and women are just as intelligent as men where it comes to thinking about jobs that are going to give them a future. So I would suggest that's probably not being flippant. That's also a way to ensure that women understand the opportunity, which is that the opportunity in technology, as you've just pointed out, Sylvia, is absolutely exponential. So even if you have a tangentially technology-related role and skill set, you can build and grow a career in technology much more easily than you might be with a traditional job. And we all know that automation is changing the way in which jobs look in the workforce. I mean, academics certainly are never going to be out of a job, and we're very pleased about that in this conversation, but everything else is up for grabs, really. So the more that we can educate women that it's not just about, doing a fun job that's nice, it's also about doing a job that will kind of add value to your own future growth and your opportunity in the workforce. So I think that's also something that universities in particular can double down on in their messaging.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Anna, with that perspective. And I also want to iterate that some of the approach which we are proactively taking, I really understand the lack of women engineers is being a problem for us as well when we are recruiting in the market, whether it's in Australia, and right now I'm in US, and we are facing similar barriers as I'm trying to recruit more people in my group. One of the things we do intentionally in our loops or the interview process is to have a senior woman sitting in a panel and have that conversation, which is not just an interview style, but also about giving them the guidance about, if you are a part of AWS or Amazon, how would that environment look like? What kind of growth opportunities are available? The other thing we proactively look at it is if any female candidate for any reason is not able to make up to that particular opportunity, what can we do, to make sure that we can align what their strengths are and their, superpowers are into the areas where they can actually make an impact. So if they are a functional fit for us, but there's just a simple technical fit might not have passed, what can we do? How can we mentor these women, outside of them, not working with us on providing that recommendation and guidance to build up a career path? I also feel that engineering is considered very much like coding, and this is just a tactical approach of looking at working in technical and engineering industries. Being a part of product companies in my past, be it Uber or Amazon, one thing I have noticed is that it's not about building code. There's a lot of things which hang around when you are actually building an engineering solution, which is right from inception of the product. And women are creative by default. You should all agree in the panel that how can you enhance and influence a product for future growth? That's where they can add impact. from an engineering perspective as well, how can we enhance the capabilities by not just writing code, but other areas which really impact from code to go from inception to realization. These are the areas also where women can add an impact. And that's what we need to kind of pursue in the universities. We need to educate that it's not about just writing 100 lines of Java code, which will make you a professional engineer. It's more than that. It's about how you can realize the impact of what you are building and productionize it to make an impact in the society, not just for yourself, but also for the longer run, for the future, for the automation, for the next big thing in AI, ML, or anything which is coming in the emerging technology sector. I think that's the message we need to put across. And it's not just about women who face this challenge about, not having a voice. I think this imposter syndrome happens across everybody. Even we in this industry, been here for so long, still experience that day in and day out on all the changes which are happening across the world based on, some, market factors, some, external factors which impact how we operate. And we ourselves are also growing, and learning that whole aspect. So it's the voice, the way of balancing ourselves is something which we are also, evolving. So I think having practices like more women voice on forefront in interview processes, more collaboration with universities and schools right from the beginning when they're actually inculcating what they need to do next, and giving them a confidence that technology, do not call technology as writing lines of code. There is so much stuff a woman can bring on the table, which is not just writing code. And I'm not saying that writing code is not what women can do. They definitely can do that. It's more about giving them that wider perspective of there are so many opportunities around, and don't be tunnel focused on just one aspect of engineering.
Yeah, there's a lot of things there. So I'll just say I've ended up accidentally being in charge of a program that has 46% female intake into cybersecurity. Here's the thing, we actually don't know why. So we're running a study to find out why, because I think figuring out like other programs, like what other programs that are also attracting females, and then understanding what it is we're doing right to do that is probably more important than what we're doing wrong. Because if you can nail the things you're doing right, you can come up with a toolkit that you can give to all sorts of different industry sectors for them to adapt their language, their wording. And I think, all of the panelists here today have given a number of different suggestions. And I think at the end of the day, no matter if you're female, low socioeconomic status, a refugee coming to Australia, or you're Aboriginal, if you don't see it, you don't know it. If you don't see it, you can't empower yourself to achieve it. And I think that's an important message. So I think we'll thank the panelists today. And I think, Bahman, if you have any additional news or gathering up or survey results, if you haven't done the Menti, we might have you come back and display some of the results. And I think we're announcing some prizes as well.
Yeah, so the Mentis is still open. So please, I think we have still a bit of time, maybe for a last round of comments if you have. So around 10 minutes, maybe you can go ahead, Alana. And still the Menti is open. So please go ahead and put your comments. I'll show it later on. So I think there were a few questions about the work that Atula did, and I think Atula answered them on the chat. So if he wants to share it with the rest of the audience, so Atula, please feel free to talk about those items.
Yeah, I think the questions were more of the issues such as privacy and irrelevant data, etc. And this is where that whole system thinking helps, because if we try to find answers, assuming many other factors remain the same, then we will be struggling. Because with this change, everything is connected to everything and everything is changing. And this is exactly what is coming out through our research as well. We start with one particular set of assumptions, but then we find, no, we can do it in a completely different way in that journey. So when you start to take that whole participatory approach and a community approach, the people willingly share their information for value co-creation. They become part of a community. And then some of these issues about privacy, etc., actually become non-issues in that. Even if I relate it to some of the discussions we had about empowering more women or girls to be in these courses, again, if we start looking at these as solving problems which are meaningful to the people, they will become part of it. I mean, so in a sense, I never had that issue of being trying to find, because in the teams I'm working, there's more or less equal distribution, whether it is in the coding teams or in the design teams. They have come because, and I know the reason is, they all relate to the problem we are trying to solve. So I think the issue is, can we sort of get a meaningful problem? Like it was mentioned, it's not the coding. Coding is a small aspect of designing the whole thing. And also it's very useful to have this mix, because most of the empowerment concepts actually came from the female members. They said, no, that is too rigid. Let's change it. So that is a very rich environment where we solve a problem and we have the groups looking at the issues, challenges, and also the whole flexibility because of the commitments. Because yes, I mean, there are members, they have got family commitments, etc., even with children's school, homeschooling these days. But as long as we have the flexibility, we all work together, help one another, that becomes a very productive environment. So again, even in that issue, my thinking is they are all connected, and certainly, yes, we need to message it back to the schools, etc. But we need to show that even in our fields, that we are solving meaningful problems, not sort of toy problems or something remote. And once we start to do that, I'm sure we will see equal participation, and which is very healthy and very useful. So it's the whole way of thinking and coming together to achieve certain, I mean, the challenges. To me, I mean, I always take the sustainable development goals because it's a major challenge. And within that, how we all can work together, sharing knowledge, working together, supporting one another, is the sort of a society which really we need to create. So those are my broader thinking and sort of thing, because even the privacy, trust, most of those issues then become non-issues in a setting like that, and it is a very enjoyable environment to work. You have a reason to wake up in the morning and go and look at your email to see what has happened overnight in another part of the world, who has been empowered, who is been smiling today. And that really keeps everyone going.
Might be the only one who likes opening their email in the morning.
Huh? Always when there's a good, if you can get a good news of some achievement, someone saying I solved this problem, or how I thought about this.
Yeah. I think that really brings in, I think, your discussion around framing it as a problem as opposed to a skill set picks up on aspects of Anna, Ashmeet, and Sylvia's talks, I think, earlier, like here's a problem to solve, as opposed to here's the exact skill set and qualifications that you need. Wouldn't it be interesting if job applications and job postings were about solving a problem as opposed to skill sets and certifications? I'll leave that one with you. Anyone else for one last question or comment from any of the panelists?
I'm not sure we've answered all these three questions of yours. Could you maybe repeat the first one again?
Design element, and Atula picked up on that a little bit with he, framed the application and as a problem as opposed to here's the skill sets that I need to do my project. So some things around user design, and I think that's a particularly excellent question for you as well, Sylvia, because design aspects would have been paramount in your ability to access marginalized communities in particular.
That's very true. Look, the design of technology is one of the key ways in which you can achieve uptake and adoption. So particularly looking at marginalized communities, it just would not be possible to do if you need a customized device, something that's expensive to buy or anything like that. So it needs to work on basically every single consumer device. It needs to work on a phone. It needs to work in with people that have lower internet capabilities. So and no need to install applications, specialized applications. So it should be as simple as, you know, you receive an SMS, you click on the link, and you can see your healthcare practitioner or whatever any other types of interactions you're trying to have. The easier you can make it, the more you can cut down on the necessary interactions and expenditures before you can get access. The more the better it is. So there's a lot of design going into the product itself. As well as the workflows around it. They're both equally important. Finally, maybe just one thing to point out, we've also worked with Aboriginal communities, and for Aboriginal communities, design is actually a very key element. So if you make the user interface more friendly and more culturally appropriate to them, with the right kind of colors, etc., you will actually find that their fear of technology will be reduced and their adoption will be easier. So there's a lot going into a lot of the different aspects of developing technology to make it more accessible to a diverse set of people.
Thank you, everyone. Do you want to wrap up, Ahmed, or is there one lingering question or?
No. Thanks very much, Elena, and thanks the panelists today. I'll just quickly wrap up with some of the survey answer, and then we announce also the winners, and hopefully they close up very soon. So thanks everyone. I'll share my screen about the couple of questions that we put to you for the answer. Do you see the results? Right, yeah, on the screen, yeah, okay. So that was the first question we asked in the first session about opportunities and the well-being. So I think pretty much many people agree that the AI would be the top technology in the opportunities, and I think was one of the discussion in the panel today, and followed by smart sensing and IoT. Many of those technology was presented, and mobile technology, privacy preserving, and cybersecurity. Look like people moving forward, regardless of the risk of the security and the privacy, which this is something that I think we observe in many other technology, but we know that those privacy and security concerns are real, and especially during the pandemic, we observed them. But we are looking forward to those opportunities and working with attendees and also the panelists in future. So this was the first survey that we put to you. The second survey was about the top 3 enabling initiative in the next 3 years, equality enabling technology, which of course people, I think they didn't have much time maybe to put all the thoughts, but they talk about some of the aspects of the advancing women in a STEM, equal opportunity, gender equality, that I think was covered by Anna and Ashmit. And of course, the startup and maybe the IT governance was supported by Sylvia's presentation. And I think generally from the today panel and presentation, we saw that how technology can be uniformly applied across the board in different countries, different gender, different technology, and how we're going to improve our life, and of course many of the challenges that we have. So thanks very much for putting your thought here. And the last item for you guys for attendee to rate is rating about the event. And so we asked you about 3 rating for the health presentation, session 1, the equality presentation 2, and the quality of the discussion forum, which is the last one. So if you use the Menti with the same code that you use for the last 2 surveys, so you would be able to rank that. And we used this survey, of course, to improve the quality of this event for the next time. So thanks very much if you put in your survey here. I'll stop sharing this one, and I providing my next slide, which is about the of course, hopefully the winner should be somewhere there. So we had a great presentation today by a number of experts in both panel of the health and well-being and the quality. So I would like to really thank presenters and contributors in both session, and of course our chair Anupama and Alena, who drive those sessions fantastically. So we mentioned that we're going to have the 2 winners of the voucher. So these are the 2 winners that the chairs pick for us. So $50 gift voucher, Gosia Plotka. So I think mentioned that I think from UK and wake up so early, 5 a.m. So I think deserve to get a voucher and then the Mohan also, I think is from Sydney to get the second one. So thank you guys for your comments and question. And I think our engagement team will be very soon emailing you about how to access this voucher. So I want to quickly wrap up and mention that it was a great pleasure to have all of you here, the presenter, contributor, and of course the attendee. This is just the beginning of these kind of activities, and we are hoping that with collaboration with the IFIP and ACS, we could host this event regularly, maybe as a workshop or as an event. Definitely, we would love to have that one face-to-face, and I'm sure all of you can't wait to back to the face-to-face, presentation and interaction after the pandemic's over. I just want to check with Simeon and Anthony if they have any last word before we wrap up.
Well, yes. Sorry. Well, first of all, I just want to thank the panelists and the mediators for outstanding job. I want to thank personally the organizers of everyone that is behind the event for the fluent sort of drive of the event. And I also want to thank the audience and for the great questions. We still will have probably to do some analysis, and that I have taken some notes that will influence what we are doing here in the university. Especially, for example, the last point about the design of the interface in accordance to some specific cultural aspects and the impact that has on indigenous participation. But I also want to thank Anthony for the support that IFIP provided for all the advertisements, and I hope that we have done our good sort of contribution to the celebration of the 60th anniversary of IFIP. Thanks, Bahman.
Thank you, Simeon. Thank you for a great presentation today. I think it's covered a lot of issues, and all of them are very important and support of the UN Sustainable Goals. And I'm glad to see all these issues canvassed, because IFIP has been supporting the UN goals for many, many years and will continue to do so. So thank you, Simeon, and all the panelists, Bahman for organizing this, and the ACS for hosting this session, and definitely lots of opportunity going forward to have further sessions into the future. So thank you.
Thanks, Anthony and Simon. And so as I mentioned for the last survey, so please give us your feedback and rate in the Menti with that code. So again, I would like to thank everyone who take their time in early morning, late night, that they're joining this event around the world. And of course, thanks our panelist, presenter, and our very nice engagement team, Mabel and Wendy, who supported this event through time, and I'm sure many of you received their email. So hopefully we can continue this event, as I mentioned, as a regular event with the support of the IFIP and ACS. So thanks again, and on behalf of Western Sydney University, IFIP, ACS, I would like to hope that you have a great day or great evening. Thank you very much.